Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen, amen, namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received communication from the following. Mr. Ansel Antoine, MP, member for Davide O'Meara, who has requested leave of absence. Mr. Esmond Ford, MP, member for Tonopuna, who has requested leave of absence during the period March 9th to 23rd, 2019. The Honorable Fitzgerald Hines, MP, member for Laventille West, and Ms. Nicole Olivier, MP, member for Labrie, who have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the following papers. 1 to 2. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Princestown Regional Corporation Chairman's Fund for the years ended September 30th, 2016 and 2017. 3 to 4. The report of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Southwest Regional Health Authority for the years ended September 30th, 2010 and 2011. The audited financial statements of the National Schools Dietary Services Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2018. The report of the 10th actuarial valuation of the National Insurance System as of June 30th, 2016. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that papers 1 to 4 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee and paper 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 to 4 be referred to the Public Accounts Committee and paper 5 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any against? The ayes have it. The Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 7, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Health to the 16th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination into the implementation of the Public Sector Investment Program. Paper number 8, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Public Utilities to the 11th report of the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions, and Statutory Authorities, including THA, on an inquiry into the efficiency and effectiveness of the Regulated Industries Commission. Paper number 9, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Public Administration to the 15th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination into the expenditure and internal controls of the Ministry of Tourism. Paper number 10, the response of the Service Commissions Department to the 19th report of the Public Accounts Committee on the examination of the audited financial statements of the Chaguanas Borough Corporation for the financial years 2008 to 2011. Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker.
Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the annual report of the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago for the year ended 30th September 2017.
The Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the Land Acquisition Requisition Order 2019.
Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm sorry, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my sincere apologies. The 23rd report of the Public Accounts Committee on an examination of the audited financial statements of the National Agricultural Marketing and Development Corporation for the financial years 2008 to 2011, and the 7th report, no, sorry, that's it.
Member for Toko, Sandy Grande.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to present the 7th report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on an inquiry into the management of the Targeted Conditional Cash Transfer Program.
Prime Minister's questions.
Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, question number 1 to the Honorable Prime Minister. In light of the invitation from the President of the United States to 5 Caribbean leaders, excluding the Prime Ministers of Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and St. Kitts and Nevis on Venezuela and other matters, could the Prime Minister indicate whether he has had discussions with the CARICOM chairman to voice the community's collective concern to the United States that these countries were deliberately excluded?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I am in no position to determine that Trinidad and Tobago or anybody has been deliberately, unwittingly, accidentally, or otherwise invited to anybody's private home. What I do know is that as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, I am constantly in communication with my CARICOM colleagues, including the chairman of CARICOM.
Supplemental, member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam. Madam, that response from the Honorable Prime Minister, one might describe as a fool's paradise. But the question is, Madam, could the Prime Minister say whether his CARICOM colleagues shares his view of so what in response to being left out of diplomatic talks with the President of the United States, seeing that Barbados, St. Kitts, and Trinidad and Tobago Prime Ministers told all and sundry that they were making tremendous progress in resolving the crisis with Venezuela?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I have no idea what that fulmination is about. So I don't know that I could respond to any of that. What I could say, that I am not the one to answer what my colleagues think about the issue. What I do know is what Trinidad and Tobago thinks about it. And we at CARICOM, Madam Speaker, we have a clear arrangement of a caucus, and the caucus has provided certain arrangements for responding to these issues.
Member for Naparima, supplemental.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Prime Minister indicate the steps taken or he plans to take to repair relations with the U.S. in the light of our exclusion from an important meeting taking place in Miami and the role of our lobbyists in this regard?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, if it is that my colleague regards a requirement to repair relations with his neighbor, if he isn't invited to his neighbor's party, I'm afraid that's not the yardstick that Trinidad and Tobago uses. We have no relationship to repair because as far as I'm aware, that there's no tear in the relations between Trinidad and Tobago and the United States. The United States remain a friendly country, and insofar as you might have a disagreement as to the approach on Venezuela, it has nothing to do with the relationship between the people of the United States and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, notwithstanding the effort of those on the other side to create that kind of division.
Supplemental, member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honorable Prime Minister, in light of this situation, does the Prime Minister still hold to his position that Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, and St. Kitts and Nevis have made significant progress in the Venezuela crisis while standing outside uninvited to diplomatic talks with one of the major parties in this situation?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, for you and the benefit of the national community, Trinidad and Tobago and the countries that are called in this way are not members of the Lima Group, have not been, and the actions of the Lima Group are not applicable to our absence, Madam Speaker. If we wanted to be in that group, since the Lima Group was formed, Trinidad and Tobago and other CARICOM countries who have not become part of the Lima Group could have done so. Careful analysis will show, Madam Speaker, that the members who have been invited to the private residence of the American president are members of the Lima Group. And I don't know why that is being confused with CARICOM. There is an arrangement in CARICOM where CARICOM has put in place a certain amount of presence of leaders, and those leaders have been carrying CARICOM's business. The invitation to the president's house was not to CARICOM. It was the individual members who are members of the Lima Group. And I do not know why members of parliament in Trinidad and Tobago would want to misrepresent this situation so as to create an issue where none exists. The Dominican Republic is not even a member of CARICOM. And we don't go around begging for invitation, Madam Speaker, because none is necessary.
The Prime Minister are all concerned that his coldness, belligerence, some may say, towards the U.S. may be the reason why we were not invited to important discussions to discuss bilateral relations between us and them.
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'm very happy to see that my colleague from Naparima, the dining partner of Marie Le Pen, is here today advocating that there's something to be gained by conducting foreign affairs in such a way that you don't disgrace the country. Madam Speaker?
Member for Couva South. Member for Couva South. I'm being disturbed. Prime Minister.
Yes, Madam Speaker. As a man who so loved the country's image for a plate of food, I don't know that the member for Naparima has any basis to be concerned about Trinidad and Tobago's position in foreign policy.
By now, we should be all familiar with standing orders. We've reached 4. Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, question number 2 to the Honourable Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister inform the House whether he has had any discussions with Mr. Wilfred Espinay, Chairman of Paria Fuel Trading Company, to determine how a request for a proposal, RFP, was advertised and then retracted for the sale of the company?
Prime Minister.
No.
Supplemental, member for Princestown.
Could the Prime Minister indicate whether he has requested a report from the line minister or Mr. Espinay into how this matter occurred?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, as you would have observed, at the first opportunity on return to this country, I spoke to the national media and by extension the national community and clarified this matter beyond all confusion.
Supplemental, member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Honourable Prime Minister say whether or not he continues to express full confidence in Mr. Espinay as Chairman of Paria Fueling?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, whenever an appointment is made by the government of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to positions in the state and private sector, if it is that the government has no confidence in any appointee, the government will act appropriately.
So the answer is yes.
Supplemental, member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Prime Minister indicate whether or not Paria Fuel Trading Company had a profit for its last year of operation?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I have no documentation to support to respond to that, and if that question is properly filed with the appropriate notice, the government would be in a position. Because Madam Speaker, I seem to remember that I seem to recall that the restructuring of Petrotrin came at December 1st last year. And it's quite surprising that a member could come to the House and ask for the first year profits when the first year hasn't even been concluded.
Supplemental, member for Caroni East.
Honourable Prime Minister, in light of your confidence in Mr. Wilfred Espinay, would you indicate whether government authorized him to conduct negotiations for the loan of $1.4 billion US?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the answer is yes. And in this House and out of this House, we have spoken on this matter of the Petrotrin debt management ad nauseum, indicating that the Ministry of Finance in protection of the country's financial situation, had the responsibility to make sure that we do not default on that debt. When we went into the restructuring program for Petrotrin, one of the things that happened, and we said so before, to the country, to those who listen, that Petrotrin would be taking responsibility for this and relieving the Ministry of Finance. And Madam Speaker, today, if it is that Petrotrin is able to raise the finance that the Ministry of Finance was having to raise, I don't see why that so upsets my friend on the other side.
Member for Vancouver South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In light of the Prime Minister's public commitment prior to the closure of Petrotrin that former employees would be given priority in the rehiring process, could the Prime Minister inform this House how many former employees of Petrotrin have been employed at Heritage Petroleum Company Limited, Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited, and Guayakara as of the 22nd of March 2019?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I am in no position to respond to that question, but if the question is filed with appropriate notice to the relevant minister, I'm sure an answer could be had.
Supplemental member for Vancouver South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Prime Minister inform this House of whether chief executive officers have been recruited at Paria Fuel Trading Company and Guayakara?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I am aware that officers are running those companies, whether in the capacity of chief executive officer, chief financial officer, or otherwise. That is a matter that can be answered by the appropriate minister if the appropriate question is filed.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister advise on the strategic thinking behind the closure of the High Commission in Uganda?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the idea behind closing the mission in Uganda is that we had observed that the role of the mission in dealing with East Africa could have been improved, but improved in such a way that it takes into account the presence of the Arab world in today's economy and our requirement to have a presence in the Middle Eastern area. So we set about to do that, Madam Speaker. And as these things are never static, as we went along that line, certain developments arose in the international community, which has caused us to be making haste slowly on that, Madam Speaker. So it was a change in policy to spread our presence not only on East Africa, but also into the Middle East.
Supplemental.
Making the decision, final decision. Prime Minister, is the Prime Minister aware that over 320 missions have been opened in Africa since 2010? Turkey opened 26, and India will open 18 this year. The question is, what is the world seeing in Africa that the government of Trinidad and Tobago appears to be unmindful of?
The world is seeing Africa, and that is why we do have missions in Africa, Madam Speaker. We have missions in Africa. So I don't know what the Turks are seeing or what the others are seeing, but I'm sure they're seeing Africa.
Supplemental member for Naparima.
Is the Prime Minister also aware that the High Commission in Uganda provided ready access to 54 missions attached to countries which form part of the African Union, and which we have now lost access to?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, that is a completely erroneous statement. We have a mission in Cape Town, we have one in Nigeria, and we have other representations. So it is completely unsound to talk about Trinidad and Tobago losing its access to the OAU. As a matter of fact, Madam Speaker, when I went to New York 2 or 3 weeks ago as part of the CARICOM delegation, one of the main delegations we met with in New York was the OAU delegation. So it is quite wrong and misleading for the member from Naparima to come here and say that we have lost access to the OAU.
Supplemental member for Naparima.
Is the Prime Minister aware of the size of the continent of Africa? That the mission in South Africa and the mission in Nigeria are thousands.
Prime Minister, member, you've already asked the question, and I'm not going to allow that as a supplemental. Member for Naparima.
I have a first class honors in geography. I could read a map.
Yeah, I have a first class honors in geography. Could the Prime Minister state why refugees from Nigeria Ghana, and Sierra Leone are treated less favorably than those from Venezuela?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, that's a matter of opinion and a basis for mischief.
Supplemental member
Could the
for
Prime
Naprima.
Minister then indicate if and when we will have a comprehensive refugee policy that is humane, linked to our absorptive capacity, and which treat Africans and fellow CARICOM citizens equally and respectfully?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, these situations tend to generate emotions of one kind or another, as you see here. But Trinidad and Tobago has always dealt with persons within our borders within the context of the adjectives used.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 6. Could the Prime Minister inform this House what is the estimated cost for the rebuilding and refurbishment of the Red House to date?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, when this government came into office, the program for rebuilding of the Red House was in excess of $500 million. UDCOT was tasked to restructure that arrangement, stop what was in place, and restart it. I'm pleased to announce today, Madam Speaker, that the cost of expenditure to date on the Red House is $244,098,000. The total commitment that we have for the project is $408 million, over $100 million less than was being done for before.
Supplemental member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, can you say how soon before this project is completed?
Prime Minister.
Certainly wouldn't take 15 years as it was before, Madam Speaker. We are expecting that the project would be completed before the end of the year.
Member for Caroni East.
Prime Minister, would you have the information of who tendered for this project and who won the tender and the cost for the tenders? If you don't have it now, could you provide it?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, that's a complex answer because it's not a question of tendering for the project. That was what they were doing. They gave $500 million project or thereabouts to one contractor. What this government did was to break up the whole Red House renovation and restoration work into packages. I think there were 17 packages which were tendered separately for various components of work. And it's in that approach that we were able to make the kinds of savings that I've just mentioned. And the project is close to being completed, and a significant amount of local contractors were involved in the project. It's a completely different approach, cost-effective and efficient.
Member for Pointe-a-Pierre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, given a recent report which stated that the natural gas company, NGC, told BPTT it wants less natural gas than is available to it for the rest of the year, could the Honourable Prime Minister state the reasons for this decision?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, again, this is an ongoing business arrangement where in recent times, as different gas supplies have been coming onto the market, the upstream pricing and the downstream pricing are slightly out of sync, meaning that given the change in the market for the downstreamers, they are not in a position to support the upstream prices in some instances. And the NGC, being the aggregator, is managing its business by controlling how much it buys from the upstreamer to sell to the downstreamer, given the differences and given the price differentials. These are marketing matters which are ongoing and being addressed by those involved.
Supplemental member for Pointe-a-Pierre.
To the Honourable Prime Minister, could you state if, given the disparity in the price as it is now, that there would be a renegotiation with the downstreamers as far as an increase in their price?
Prime Minister.
All matters of this nature, given the nature of the business and the nature of the issue in front of the users, consumers, suppliers, aggregators, negotiations and renegotiations are in the best interest of all parties to ensure that they all stay profitable in the marketplace.
Member for Pointe-a-Pierre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 8 to the Honourable Prime Minister. Given a Reuters report on March 12, 2019, which stated that the Trinidad Petroleum Holdings is in advanced debt restructuring talks with banks and has secured new loans of up to $1.4 billion US, could the Prime Minister state if the government of Trinidad and Tobago would be guaranteeing these loans to the state company?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the fact that the company that will be making this loan is owned 100% by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, Petrotrin's business, and by extension the new company's business, carries with it an implied guarantee that the government will stand in the shoes of these companies if they get into difficulty. That has not changed in the marketplace. But what I do know is that the company is in a position to negotiate these loans without the loan forming part of the portfolio of the Exchequer.
Supplemental member for Caroni East.
Comfortable that after the state having spent $18 billion in the Petrotrin issue, are you comfortable the state having to support another area of major concern of close to $10 billion again?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I have no idea what he's talking about.
Member for Caroni Central.
Prime Minister, on this particular issue of the raising of the bond, does the fact that you had a position of the chairman, a different position of the minister, and a position by the Prime Minister which seems to leave the door open to the position of the chairman, does that make it more difficult for the company to negotiate on a standalone basis rather than have the government come in for support?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I am not seeing the devils that my colleagues on the other side are seeing. The statement of the chairman and the statement of the Prime Minister are basically saying the same thing. Madam Speaker, what I said yesterday, and I want to repeat it here, is that Paria Company is a new subsidiary that was formed specifically for a purpose that responded to the non-production of fuels in Trinidad and Tobago, meaning the closure of the refinery. Until we are in a position to determine what is going to happen to the refinery, and our position of the government is work very hard to get a refinery operating there. Until we know what the outcome of that is, it is premature to get involved in speculating on the future of Paria, because the proposals that may come to us may involve some aspect of Paria's business which could be duplicated, because if we have a refinery run by somebody in Point-a-Pierre, which we hope we will eventually, then just imagine it. We are now importing fuel through Paria. That is its core and sole business. If we are now producing our own fuel in the country, then it necessarily follows that some kind of rationalization has to take place. And all I'm saying to the people of Trinidad and Tobago is not to get upset by those who are previous, and let us wait and work it out. We are out there looking for proposals for the refinery, and it would be irresponsible to shut the Paria business aspect of it out and leave the refinery without any access to what Paria is doing, because then you may not get a proposal for the refinery. That's all I'm saying, and it is very important for the government to use our positions with the refinery, with Paria, to get the best position for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That is the government's position. So it's not a question of what the chairman says or the Prime Minister says.
Supplemental, member for Point-a-Pierre.
Supplementary Prime Minister, based on what you just described about the refinery, do you have any regrets in closing down the refinery?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I have no regrets. It's a decision that any responsible government of Trinidad and Tobago would have taken, because the circumstances of the company required restructuring, and this government, true to its oath of office, has embarked upon the restructuring. There's a transitional period, and we have every confidence that the future of our involvement in the oil industry would be bright once we get everything going and once we get the support and we escape the undermining of those who will undermine us.
Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Could the Prime Minister inform this House whether the government approves of the intimidation and terror tactics of the military-backed regime against elected representatives in the National Assembly who oppose the Nicolas Maduro regime in Venezuela?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago's position on the behavior of governments around the world is very simple and straightforward. We are governed by the international standards as embodied in the Treaty of the United Nations.
Supplemental, Member for Caroni Central.
Yes. Honorable Prime Minister, if this situation in Venezuela escalates in terms of state terror against opposition members and their supporters, would you contemplate distancing yourself from the Maduro regime?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, distancing myself from the Maduro regime. Madam Speaker, I am not in this job for Keith Rowley. You know. I am in this job as head of a government of Trinidad and Tobago, representing the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And this kind of unnecessary speculation will not draw me into making statements that are not in front of us. Madam Speaker, if it turns out that Trinidad and Tobago has to be a responsible nation as we are, as we were, as we will be, we will take the appropriate actions at the appropriate time on any issue.
Supplemental, Caroni Central.
Prime Minister, you know I didn't mean it as a personal question, but
No,
as you as
all.
head of government. On the website of the Foreign Affairs and CARICOM Ministry, Prime Minister, although it speaks to the issue of sovereignty and sovereign equality of all states, and it speaks to the issue of non-interference in the internal affairs of other states, on the website it also states that this is qualified by acceptance of responsibility of the international community to take collective action in cases of gross domestic violence.
You have 15 seconds.
Yes. Gross domestic violations of human rights or genocide. Would an escalation of this kind then prompt the Prime Minister, on behalf of his government and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, to take a stand against that regime?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the behavior of the government of Trinidad and Tobago will be determined by the principles that we stand by. And all of those principles are spelled out, whether it's about humanitarian, it's about misconduct among nations, within nations, they're all spelled out there. And that is the basis on which any government of Trinidad and Tobago will take a position in situations as envisaged by my friend from Caroni Central.
Member for Caroni Central.
Madam Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree that, or not agree, that recent developments in Venezuela may have rendered CARICOM very vulnerable to division and more susceptible to competing bilateral alliances, which now have the potential to undermine any recent initiatives to quicken the pace of the CSME?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, to pretend that divisions in CARICOM is new or could be avoided because of the action of any Prime Minister is to be naive or mischievous. Madam Speaker, CARICOM has 14 nations, many of which guard certain positions very jealously. And in recent times, on this Venezuela issue of all issues, was one of the few times when CARICOM spoke with one voice, when all CARICOM members issued the CARICOM position with respect to the Venezuela situation. If, Madam Speaker, that is not to be viewed as progress, well then, we are not in a position to tell individual countries how to conduct their business. One of the things that we have been struggling with throughout, and Trinidad and Tobago has been in the forefront of always asking for CARICOM to speak with one voice. It's an objective, it's a potential, and we always work towards that. It is not always achieved, but we always travel in hope of arriving at the best destination.
Member for Oropuch East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question 11, yes. In light of the revelation by the Election and Boundaries Commission that the local government report for the 2019 local government elections was sent to the Minister in June 2017, could the Prime Minister indicate when this report will be laid in the House?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the 9th report of the EBC under the Municipal Corporations Act for the purposes of local government election was submitted on 12 June 2017 to the Minister of Local Government. Issues were raised by the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, which resulted in amendments being made. An updated version was submitted by the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government to the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government by the EBC. The report would be laid shortly in this House.
Is now spent.
Questions?
Member for Naparimo.
To the Minister of National Security, could the Minister inform the House what urgent measures are being taken to safeguard the interests of local fishermen in Cedros from prospective Venezuelan pirates who continue to pose a daily threat to the lives of these fisherfolk?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just this week, the Member of Parliament for Point Fortin and myself were down in Cedros, along with the Acting Chief of Defence Staff, the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service Executive, who's in charge of that area, along with the Chief Immigration Officer and other officers. One of the things that we did, Madam Speaker, was take a look at what has already been put in place. We have been increasing the number of border patrols with both larger vessels as well as the interceptors. That's within the waters. On the coastline, the police have also increased their patrols. These are some of the things that are being done to deal with these issues. Of course, it has not as yet been comprehensively ascertained that the thefts of nets are taking place by what they call Venezuelan pirates. But that is within the remit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, and they have stepped up the patrols, and they are working with those on the ground.
I note the Minister's intention to take some action, but the question is, why is it that our Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard always seems to be missing in action when our fishermen are harassed in our territorial waters?
Madam Speaker, firstly, I don't think there is any evidence before us that the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard is missing. The size of the waters, because I actually took the boat, drove up with the Coast Guard from Cedros up to Port of Spain, and the size of water to be patrolled, if we had the OPVs, that would have helped. If they had the interceptors, and they laugh. I want the people of Trinidad and Tobago to look at the opposition laugh at the crime that is taking place under their watch and the lack of border protection.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much. To the population of Trinidad and Tobago, under the People's Partnership, they failed to maintain the hostile vessels. They did not bring the OPVs. They did not maintain the interceptors. So now that we have come in, that is what is being dealt with, and the Coast Guard is getting back up to where it needs to be.
Every member who wishes to ask a question will be allowed. I will not allow member for Princess Town. You see, if you look this way, you would see that I'm standing. I'm not going to tolerate this shouting across the floor. Supplemental, Member for Naparima.
Yes. Madam Speaker, thank you. The question is, when will the government stop looking back and complaining and realize that you are in power for 4 years? And is this complaint,
One question.
Yes.
You ask a question, I'm not allowing that question. You have another supplemental
Yes, I do.
based on what is here
Yes.
and the answer.
Yes, yes.
Please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Appreciate it a lot. Is this complaint indicative of the fact that our borders remain porous and unprotected, and that the government is incapable of guaranteeing the integrity of our national borders?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To the men, women in the Trinidad and Tobago Coast Guard, to the men and women in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, who on a daily basis are putting their lives at risk and have increased the security on our borders and closed down the porousness of our borders with the limited resources that they have. As a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, I thank them, while those on the other side ridicule them.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Health, could the Minister inform this House how many elective surgeries are being cancelled at the San Fernando General Hospital due to overcrowding during the period 20th of March to the 22nd of March 2019?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, for the period 20th of March, which was Wednesday, up until yesterday, 21st, those are the 2 days I have the figures for. 65 surgeries were in fact completed. 17 elective surgeries were postponed, which means that roughly about 70% of all surgeries carded were in fact done. Only about 30% of elective surgeries were in fact rescheduled, and we expect normal service to resume by Sunday into Monday. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
And tell Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Health, the 17-person surgeries who were cancelled, who do not have the luxury to seek medical attention in the United States of America, could you give us a breakdown of how long have they been on the waiting list for the said surgeries?
Minister of Health.
Yes. Madam Speaker, elective surgeries are surgeries which are scheduled way in advance and does not involve an emergency. For example, cataract surgeries, hip replacements, those are not life-threatening or urgent. Those are the types of surgeries that over the past 2 days have in fact been rescheduled, and we will come to them from next week, as I indicated. These patients don't have to go to the private sector in Trinidad or anywhere else. It will be done in the public sector once we get over this little state of emergency that we have there with overcrowding. Admittedly, there is some overcrowding, but only elective surgeries, less than 30%, have been cancelled. Thank you very much, Madam
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, with regards to those 17 patients, are you giving them the assurance that they will be fast-tracked in terms of getting the surgeries done, as opposed to being added to the end of the waiting list, as sometimes happens?
Minister of Health.
And that is, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for the question, and that is in fact what we are doing. They will not be put to the end of the waiting list. They will be treated on a priority basis because they have in fact been rescheduled. Thank you very much.
Member for Oropuch West.
To the Minister of National Security. With regard to the detention of 10 Venezuelan nationals at Cedras, including 5 of whom were children, could the Minister indicate whether the children were admitted to the Children Protection Unit at the Oropuch Police Station?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the answer is no. The immigration officers took the very humane decision after doing an assessment of these Venezuelans, including the children, and decided to release them on supervision orders So they were not detained for any length of time, and they were not sent to the police station.
Member for Oropouche West, supplemental.
Honourable Minister, is there any set procedure or policy to deal with children of Venezuelan immigrants?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. All children who are within the borders of Trinidad and Tobago fall under our suite of children's legislation. However, in immigration matters, the Immigration Department and Division can take decisions with respect to the detaining of persons who have entered illegally or who have overstayed their visits. So with respect to these particular children, that was utilized. With respect to other children, Venezuelan or otherwise, the Children's Authority is the body that has jurisdiction over them when they've run afoul of the law, which would include overstaying and other matters that deal with immigration, and they work hand in hand with our Immigration Division.
Supplemental, member for Oropouche West.
Is the Children's Authority sufficiently resourced to deal with this further influx of children?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I smile because the legislation that was passed prior to this administration and proclaimed did not put in place the resources that were necessary. So the answer is no. There is being, well, what we have done is we have implemented the legislation and we have been building.
Now, I just heard us Stoops. I'm sure it couldn't be somebody expressing frustration here.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. They must express frustration because this government has been the one that has built out the children's courts. They've built out the children's homes. They've built out the child protection unit. They've built out the residence for children. All done. Halfway houses for the children. All done by this administration, ensuring the protection of children's rights. Could there be more resources for them? The answer is yes. And are we searching? The answer is yes. Just this week in Cabinet, we took a decision to provide more resources to the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. If you bring back the hundreds of millions you stole, we can build it out.
Member for Princess Town, member for Naparima, I advise you all again.
On notice, questions for oral answer.
Honourable members, on the request of the member for Couva South, leave has been granted to withdraw question 154. Leader of the House.
Thank you very much, Madam. Madam Speaker, we were very ready to answer it, so I'm sorry about that. There are 22 questions for oral answer. We're answering, well, there are now 21. And we're answering 20. We're asking for deferral of question number 140 and 158 for 2 weeks. And there are 7 questions for written answer, and we're answering all 7.
Thank you very much. So that question 140 and 158 are deferred for 2 weeks from today. Member for Oropouche West.
Question number 91 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, tax refund on severance payment made to former Petrotrin workers are currently being made at this time as we speak.
How many workers are affected, Minister?
The number of workers affected approximates 5,000. It is my understanding close to 3,000 have already been refunded, and the BIR is working assiduously to clear the backlog.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 92 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Speaker. Madam Speaker, flood mitigation work in the Pinal, Debe, and Siparia region commenced on January 15, 2019. 10 projects were identified for the San Francisco and Woodland region. 6 have been completed, 4 are currently in progress, 3 at 90%, 1 is at 15%. I do have a comprehensive list that I can circulate to the member.
Supplemental, Member for Oropouche West.
Honorable Minister, when would this massive landslide in San Francisco fix, having regard that you had toured the area in 2016, toured it with me, and you promised by November
Honorable Member,
2017.
is this a supplemental question based on the response and the question asked?
Yes, ParlView.
What was that public relations?
Madam Speaker, the question that was posed, question 92, did not speak of landslides. So I will have that information forwarded for the member.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you. Question number 93 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Yes, there are patients with an extended length of stay at public hospitals. Part B, there are currently 18 persons at the San Fernando General Hospital and none at the Port of Spain General Hospital, respectively. Answer to Part C, the maximum time frame that a person can be treated at a public hospital varies based on the type of diagnosis and treatment and care required for the individual patient. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental, Member for Oropouche West.
Honorable Minister, why were these people kept there and they continue to live after being treated?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I thank the member for the question. And this is where we don't appreciate our free public health system. And because it is free, it is abused. Many of these patients are left there by their families because their families don't want to take care of them at home. Madam Speaker, we have calculated they are across the healthcare system. There are 51 patients in all who are long-stay patients. That's the size of a small private hospital. Do you know of any small private hospital with 51 beds that will continue to provide free healthcare to persons? And 89 in San Fernando. And this does not consider the patients who stay there when we call their children, come and collect your mother, come and collect your father, and the member for Faizabad is nodding his head. And they don't come. What do? You leave them there because we can't throw them into the streets. We can't throw them into the streets. You make some arrangements with the Ministry of Social Development, and if there is space, they can be accommodated. But, Madam Speaker, what the country also needs to be told, Christmas and Carnival are when children take their parents to be housed at the public expense in public hospitals because they want to go up north for Christmas. And for Carnival, they start to dump their children into the public healthcare system from Carnival Friday. They don't come Carnival Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and miraculously, they appear to collect their children Ash Wednesday. That is what this free public health system does, and the taxpayer picks up the bill for that. Yes, some parents deliberately give their children Broclax to induce diarrhea. So they go to the A&E complaining of diarrhea, and you have to keep them. There is no law against giving your child a laxative on Carnival Friday. That, Madam Speaker, is what this free public healthcare system has been doing from time immemorial, and because it is free, it is abused. Thank you very much, Madam
Supplemental
Speaker.
Member for Barataria Sanwan.
you neglected to say the amount of people who are also living at St. Anne's Hospital who are not mentally ill. Could you give the information now, or can you at a later date?
Member, I don't see that in the question. The question was in terms of public hospitals?
Yes, St. Anne's is a public hospital. Okay. Thank you very much, Member for Barataria, San Juan. Madam Speaker, the way this country has dealt with mental health at St. Anne's over the decades, and I blame no one for it, it's cultural. It's an absolute tragedy. It's a tragedy. What we have is St. Anne's, which is a holding bay, and I use the term warehouse. We warehouse patients there for 20 and 30 years. That is why Cabinet, on my urging, recently approved the creation of a National Director of Mental Health and Substance Abuse to once and for all start the formal process of decentralizing mental health. Because all the mental health advocates will tell you the best place to treat them is in their communities, near to their support systems of family. Many of them can hold jobs. So once we have that position filled, we start once and for all the process of decentralization of mental health. So the exact problem you faced and I am facing now, we can start to treat with it so patients are not warehoused at St. Anne's at the expense of the taxpayer for 20 and 30 years. We have not dealt with it, and we are dealing with it now. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question 99 to the Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, over the period September 2015 to January 2019, 45 persons were relocated from the streets to care facilities. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental, Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Could you say, as defined by the age group of a child, how many children that would comprise of that 45, if any?
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, I'm not able to provide that information at this time, but I will do so.
Member for Kamuta Mansinala.
Thank you. Honorable Minister, could you advise from what locations these socially displaced persons were removed from and to what location? Thank you.
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, as indicated in the question, they were relocated. They were picked up all over Trinidad, none in Tobago, and they were all placed at the Center for Socially Displaced Persons at Riverside in South Key.
Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question 100 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The University of Trinidad and Tobago has advised the following. A listing of 244 persons has been identified by the Board of UTT for retrenchment consequent upon the university's restructuring exercise. That list is now being discussed with a recognized majority union. B, the estimated severance amount is approximately $18.5 million, comprising notice period payments, severance payments, and unutilized vacation leave payments. And C, an application is being prepared by the UTT for submission to the Ministry of Education for supplemental funding in the 2019 estimates of expenditure for the implementation of the restructuring proposals. Thank you very much.
Supplemental, Member for Shogunas East.
Could the Minister indicate these 244, what are the locations that they're going to be severed from?
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, at this point, I don't have that information, but I can provide it at a subsequent occasion on time. Thank you.
Member for Shogunas East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Question 101 to the Minister of Education.
Minister of Education.
Madam Speaker, no member of staff of the University of Trinidad and Tobago is currently under investigation with respect to their qualifications. Thank you.
Member for Couva North.
Madam Speaker, question number 107 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service has indicated that the investigation into the missing $10 million from the Tobago House of Assembly, the funds meant for Virgin Atlantic Airways, is ongoing. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is working with the authorities, the law enforcement authorities in the United Kingdom, various law enforcement agencies in the United Kingdom to resolve this matter. At this time, it would be imprudent to provide any more information having regard to these ongoing investigations.
Member for Kamuto Manzanilla.
Thank you. Question number 118 to the Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The target completion date of assessments of flood victims is March 29, 2019. Thank you.
Member for Faizabad.
The Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in 2016, the government began discussing with the People's Republic of China the possibility of getting assistance with the building and outfitting of a new forensic science center. After extensive discussions with the People's Republic of China, they agreed to assist via a grant with the design, construction, and outfitting of a forensic science center and a DNA center. Cabinet agreed in January 2018 to the construction of this state-of-the-art forensic and pathology services facility on a parcel of land located in Mount Hope. The Chinese have agreed to a grant of approximately $10 million to Trinidad and Tobago for the design, construction, and outfitting of these facilities. The designs are currently being worked on by the Chinese along with the Ministry of National Security, and we're working on proceeding with this project, which it is hoped will be completed by third quarter 2020.
Thank you for that answer, Minister. Whilst we await the completion of that center, and we look forward to it, Minister, can you indicate whether the situation has been normalized at the current Forensic Sciences Center with regards to the backlog of those awaiting forensic autopsies?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much. My understanding is the answer to that question is yes. We have brought on board a new forensic pathologist who has been performing his duties there. My understanding at this stage is there's no backlog at the Forensic Science Center. We have progressed with the UNDP, and we're moving I hope, very quickly to get more on board. I've asked them for 3 additional forensic pathologists. During the interim period, we also have had interest from recently graduated forensic pathologists, and once they can fit the criteria, I intend to hire them.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Minister. With regards to those who have expressed interest, can you indicate what might be the issue in terms of they not being brought on board as soon as possible?
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, my understanding is this is a recent graduate. So she's only now graduated and may be available to take up the position. So once we engage in discussions, she has sufficient qualifications, we will move to offer her a contract and employ her.
Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 121 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Member for Faizabad. According to the information provided by the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, the Southwestern Division was initially selected for polygraph testing due to the high influx of illegal weapons and narcotics in that division. The Trinidad and Tobago Police Service will further expand this strategy to areas where they deem necessary. This decision shall be made by the Commissioner of Police and the executive members based on the prevalence of activities such as high trafficking, high gang-related activities, and high existence of weapons and narcotics. It is proposed that the introduction of polygraph testing will ensure that officers remain legitimate in the performance of their duties, despite the incidents occurring within the identified areas and their surroundings. Additionally, given the nature of the duties and operations being undertaken by officers attached to certain specialist units, sections, and branches, the Commissioner of Police will give consideration to introducing polygraph testing to officers in these special units.
Member for Faisabad.
Question number 122 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. The answer: yes, the human papillomavirus vaccination program is fully operational. For the period 2016 to 2018, 55,104 doses were administered, representing an increase of 37% compared to the period 2013 to 2015 of 40,001 doses. It is expected that by the end of the calendar year 2019, this year, 31,500 doses will be administered. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Faisabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Minister, can you indicate whether this vaccination is available at all the health centers or just at selected health centers?
Minister of Health.
It is available at, I believe, selected health centers. I don't want to put my head on a block to say all. I can find that out for you, and it could be asked, not a problem. Thank you very much.
Supplemental member for Carneys.
Honourable Minister, could you indicate what vaccine is being given? Is it the Silverix vaccine or the non-covalent? And whether there is contemplation for a second dose to be given 6 months subsequent to the first? And
Minister of Health.
I will get that information for the honourable member.
Member for Barataria Sanwan, supplemental.
Minister, is the vaccination program being extended to boys?
Minister of Health.
Yes, the vaccination program has been available to males between the ages of 12 to 26. Even though they don't get cervical cancer, they can in fact transmit the virus. But even so, boys who get the virus or can develop genital warts and so on. So yes, it is recommended for both boys between the ages, males between the ages of 12 to 26, and females and girls between the ages of 12 to 45. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Caroni East.
Huh? Well, girls and women.
Minister, is there a close collaboration with the Ministry of Education in that matter and sensitization to those who opposed it previously?
Minister of Health.
Yes, there is. But I'm glad you raised the issue of opposition to vaccines. Madam Speaker, and I thank you for that. Madam Speaker, one of the major health crises facing the world, not Trinidad and Tobago, the world, and including Trinidad and Tobago, is this anti-vaccine campaign, what we call anti-vaxxers, which leads to vaccine hesitancy. And it is unfortunate that it has reached the hallowed halls of the University of the West Indies and the medical fraternity in Trinidad and Tobago. I was criticized by Dr. Stefan Gift. He wrote an article in the papers chastising me for leading the flu vaccination drive at the Tunapuna market last year. And I was equally concerned when a respected pediatrician, got free access to 2 nights on TV6 during the news program, prime time, 2 consecutive nights, to talk about anti-vaccine issues. And there was no rebuttal. TV6 did not allow, in the interest of fairness, to have someone come the other nights to give the other side of the story. I was appalled by that for 2 reasons. We have free speech, but as Baratarius and will find out, free speech is not absolute. You can't walk into a crowded cinema and say fire. Whilst we have free speech, we have an obligation to give both sides a story. And when that medical practitioner got free rein for 2 nights consecutively, and no one else got an opportunity to rebut, that is a dangerous thing that we are doing in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Barataria Sanwan.
Number 1 29 to the Minister of Housing and Urban
to see
Development.
what I want to
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, all proposals submitted by local private construction companies, whether competing against international firms or not, have been fairly evaluated on their financial capacity and technical capability, which is in accordance with the approved tendering process of the Board of the Trinidad and Tobago Housing Development Corporation.
Member for Barataria-Sanwan.
Question 130 to the Minister of Health.
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, prior to September 2015, the waiting time for histopathology reports ranged from 1 month to 18 months with a backlog of 1,400 reports. That is what I inherited. After an assessment, it was determined that there were several operational issues that accounted for long waiting times, which included the lack of proper equipment, limited staff with the requisite skills and competencies, and occupational health and safety issues. Since 2017, the waiting time for histopathology reports has been reduced from 1 to 18 months, which I inherited, down to 1 to 2 weeks. This was due to several measures being implemented, including the purchase of several pieces of equipment to improve the process design and strengthen the analysis of sample tissues, including the microtome device, the cryostat machine, and an automated stainer. The hiring of additional staff, including pathologists and technicians, with supporting training to enhance skills and competencies, and the development and implementation of a correction action plan to address several occupational health and safety issues, including the use of personal protective equipment, the need for greater ventilation, and timely disposal of chemical and tissue waste. Thank you very much, Madam
Supplemental
Speaker.
member for Barataria-Sanwan.
Minister of Health, we are then, from what you just said, a specimen should not take more than 2 weeks for a specimen diagnosed by the pathology department. Yes. That's okay.
Member for Barataria-Sanwan.
Minister of Health, question number 131.
Minister of Health.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Answer, no. The severe Hirschsprung disease is not a life-threatening illness and cannot be eligible for funding under the Children's Life Fund, as the treatment for this illness is available locally. To date, a review of the Children's Life Fund records has revealed that no applications, that is, no applications, were received for funding for children suffering with this illness. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Point-a-Peer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 138 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, maintaining and growing the domestic production base is a top priority to Heritage Petroleum Company Limited. As the company works to meet this goal, it is actively reviewing its exploration workflows, reservoir description and management procedures, and assessing its production infrastructure. The plan is to adopt best practices to meet global industry standards and position Heritage Petroleum to be an internationally competitive E&P company. The following are the primary methods or procedures that Heritage is in the process of implementing in its exploration and production operations. Under exploration, I have to get a little technical here, but excuse me. Collate and build exploration scale products that include, not limited to, gross depositional environmental maps, thermal maturation maps, play extent maps, composite risk maps, and basal models that will collectively form the basis for an effective exploration strategy. 2, improve reservoir engineering workflows and accompanying synergies with geological and geophysical workflows, which will enable proper field description and the creation of appropriate static and dynamic models. 3, approach field development from an asset scale life cycle perspective. 4, implement consistent exploration workflows across the marine and land operation to ensure prospect volumes and risk are objectively described within a single exploration portfolio. And 5, implement an exploration strategy
that can effectively compete for capital resources and create avenues for expanding the company's acreage. On the production side, repair of the current metering system, most important, and implementation of new multi-phase metering system to allow for proper production allocation and production optimization. Implementation of a dynamic surface facility model to understand system chokes, that's the pressure regime across the field, which would identify areas in need of debottlenecking and areas with a capacity for increased production. 3, establishment of an opportunity progression process to ensure that only opportunities that add or protect barrels of production are executed. 4, improve the production management system for well work, including workovers and drilling. 5, implementation of an automatic level control for PCP pump. And 6, improve the life of field plan for all assets.
Minister, you have outlined 5 actions in exploration and 6 in production. From my information, none of those things are still being reviewed and assessed. Could you verify if any of those actions have taken place?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Madam Speaker, Petrotrin, Heritage is now assessing its options, and primarily because the company has been stuck in the past. It has been operating. I worked at Petrotrin for many years. Petrotrin is still operating as Shell and Texaco and Tesoro operated. The world has changed, the industry has changed, and they are now trying to implement the modern technologies because everything now is dynamic models. You create the models to tell you how the reservoir will perform. So it is not static anymore, it's dynamic, and I think we are going in the right direction. And we have bright, young scholars that we have trained in this country in geology, in geophysics, in petroleum engineering, in reservoir engineering that will lead this charge.
Supplemental member point of view.
So, Minister, based on your response, am I to get from your answer that nothing new has been implemented today?
I'm sorry, I just missed that question. I was detracted.
Can I repeat, Madam Speaker? Yeah. Based on your response, Minister, is it fair to say that no new measures and actions have been implemented to date?
That is not true. A lot of these things call for data acquisition, for setting up your database to run your models on the computer system, and all these are preparatory work so that it will happen very shortly. And there are top people that we are recruiting now, both with international experience and our bright local scholars. And this program will be in place in the coming months.
Member for Point of View.
Question number 139 to the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the government's decision to shut down the refinery or cease operation was based on the fact that it was no longer feasible to operate the refinery in its then unsustainable configuration and capacity, with high overheads, recurring and high debt, and high operating costs. The refinery was losing a whopping $2 billion per annum. The position at that stage was to stop the multi-billion-dollar hemorrhaging at the refinery and its adverse impact on our national economy, and then establish a more positive and feasible approach for the use of the asset. The difference now is that the refinery will no longer be encumbered with the extremely high and unprofitable operating cost of the past, which included to a suitable party who will be better placed to source the 100,000 barrels per day of additional crude oil required to operate the refinery at its optimum efficiency level and inject the hundreds of millions of dollars in additional investment capital required to upgrade the refinery to world standards, especially for diesel fuel, and manage its operating costs at no expense to the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago while providing employment and significant income generation, including taxes to the state.
Supplemental, member for Caroni East.
Honorable Minister, would you be kind enough to provide to the population and to the House, for sure, the empirical data that substantiates the repeated statement that it would have cost the government $2 billion annually to run Petrotrin? Could you provide that empirical data?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
The accounts of Petrotrin clearly indicated that the company, the refinery in particular, was losing approximately $2 billion per annum. The consolidated accounts indicated much less. But if you disaggregate the account, exploration and production was making significant profit, but that was being eroded by the refinery. So the company's consolidated books will indicate smaller losses and sometimes a small profit. But that did not reflect clearly the operations of the refinery, which was hemorrhaging significant amounts of money. I will go as far as to say, we were importing 100,000 barrels of crude per day and losing $5 per barrel on every barrel we refined. I mean, if that is not an untenable situation, I don't know what is.
Supplemental, member for Point of Peer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Minister state how much the refinery is now, the hemorrhaging that is costing the taxpayers of this country?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industry.
The refinery has been mothballed. The refinery is not costing anything, save and except the small fee we pay to Demos to keep it safe. Security, well, those are minuscule costs compared to how when you're running the refinery. And we are now, as the Prime Minister said, we have now invited proposals, and I must go on record as saying that the interest is very significant, and we expect something very positive to come out of that process.
Supplemental, member for Caroni East. No. Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question 152 to the Minister of Works and Transport.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Blame Wassa for
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in 2011, a contract was awarded for the Gibraltar cable barriers in the amount of $11.3 million. From 2011 to the end of the contract, sometime early 2017, close to $34 million was spent on repairs. That was an untenable situation. Going forward, the Ministry of Works have started to do some of the repairs in-house by renting the equipment from the agent of the Gibraltar cable barriers, and we are working with them to try to develop the skills in-house because it is really an expensive system. It is a very good system, but the big question is, can we afford it at this point in time? So from 2018, 2019, we would have spent close to $725,000 on the cable barriers using in-house labor and renting the equipment from the agent. Thank you.
Supplemental, member for Couva South.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, recently the Minister of Finance raised the loan of approximately $1.36 billion from the Andean Bank. Will any percentage of, or what quantity of this loan will be used for the expansion of the cable barrier system in the country?
I'm not going to allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Couva South.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. With respect to question 153, taking into consideration the response that has been given by the Minister to my colleague in relation to question 120, I have nothing further to ask.
Okay. And member for Naparima.
Question number 159. Sorry, question number 159 to the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, Subsequent to the response given in this House on February 15, 2019, by the Honorable Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, where it was stated that together with the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, a meeting would be held with the stakeholders to discuss the matter fully. A few days ago, the Minister received a formal request from a group of 10 organizations, namely Fishermen and Friends of the Sea, Las Cuevas Fishing Association, the Cocoreet Fishing Facility and Fish Market Association, Independent Fishing Union of Trinidad and Tobago, Blue Reef Bamboo Cunupia Fishing Association, Orange Valley Trawlers Association, Carly Bay Fishing Association, Claxton Bay Fishing Association, Marabella Fishing Association, San Fernando Cooperative Society Limited, Moruga Larafin Fishing Association, and the Trinidad and Tobago Fishing Association. In that letter, the organizations indicated that fisherfolk are now forced to use super gasoline, which is more expensive and burns faster than regular gasoline. This results in fisherfolk having to spend more money on fuel, which acts as a deterrent from going out to sea. The end result is fewer expeditions, limited income, a shortage of supply, and the inevitable increase in the price of fish. The organizations requested a stakeholder meeting to discuss the issues affecting the local fisherfolk. Madam Speaker, in a response to that letter dated March 18, 2019, the Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries confirmed the upcoming stakeholder meeting, and in advance of that meeting, invited the group of organizations to provide him with their recommendations to deal with the issue of fuel supply and other relevant matters. Madam Speaker, the fuel issues raised by fisherfolk would be determined at the upcoming meeting to be held with these affected persons and their representatives.
Supplemental, Member for Naparima.
Thank you. Would the Minister tell us while this meeting is being scheduled, does the government have any thoughts to present to that meeting in terms of bringing relief to the fishermen?
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Could the Minister...
Supplemental.
Could the Minister enumerate any of these ideas that is the government is contemplating?
Leader of the House.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Agriculture, I think it would be prudent for those ideas to come forward at the meeting and not before.
Honourable members, question time for oral questions is now spent.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers.
Honourable members, I have been advised that this item by agreement shall be taken later in today's sitting.
Personal explanations. Introduction of bills. The Non-Profit Organizations Bill 2019 in the name of the Attorney General, as listed on the supplemental order paper. The Administration of Justice Indictable Proceedings, Amendment Number 2 Bill 2019, in the name of the Attorney General, the Civil Asset Recovery and Management, and Unexplained Wealth Bill 2019, in the name of the Attorney General. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister. Public business, private members' business. Motions.
Member for Faisaban.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas the United Nations established 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the so-called SDGs, to transform the world by 2030, and whereas the second target under SDG number 5 states the elimination of all forms of violence against all women and girls in the public and private spheres, including trafficking and sexual and other types of exploitation. And whereas women are increasingly becoming victims of domestic abuse, violent crime, and human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago, be it resolved that the government take urgent steps to ensure the protection of our nation's women. Madam Speaker, as our country approaches its 57th birthday as an independent nation, women in Trinidad and Tobago have much to celebrate. The offices of President of the Republic, President of the Senate, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Leader of the Opposition, currently held by a former Prime Minister at the time of first for a woman, and sitting here today as a member for Siparia, are positions currently held by women. Indeed, women occupy high offices in many other spheres of our society, including seats in this honorable House, as government ministers, and as leaders in the public service and the private sector. Women in Trinidad and Tobago continue to access many opportunities to enable their personal development, for example, in the areas of education and employment. However, Madam Speaker, a dark cloud continues to pervade our otherwise progressive society. I speak of the continuing and unabating scourge of violence directed against our nation's women. Madam Speaker, if our society is a tapestry, then our women are the fabric that holds us together. Domestic violence is the menace that threatens to destroy it altogether. Our women have been the matriarchs of our society since the end of slavery and indentureship. Theirs is a role that could never be overstated. But today we exist in an environment, some would say, fostered by this administration, where our women and girls are under attack like never before. The figures are showing that more of our women and girls are being murdered, raped, assaulted, kidnapped, and beaten than at any other time in the history of our country. Whilst we lose our mothers, daughters, grandmothers, aunts, and sisters, some are saying that this government seems oblivious to this scourge, a scourge that threatens the very fabric of our society and our future generations. Madam Speaker, domestic violence is like a cancer eating away at our very existence. But unlike some cancers in a medical sense, there is a cure that can provide relief to all victims of domestic violence. And there is a solution that can reform and rehabilitate the offenders of this ghastly act. Madam Speaker, it is with this in mind that I sought the permission of this Honorable House to address the issues of domestic abuse, human trafficking, and violent crime against women. I wish to thank the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, the Member of Parliament for Siparia, the Honorable Kamala Prasad Bisesa, for sanctioning this motion, and to thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me. Madam Speaker, exactly 2 weeks ago on March 8, Trinidad and Tobago joined the rest of the world in celebrating International Women's Day. One of the underlying concerns raised in all of the fora and the events which took place to mark this important occasion was the call for the greater protection of our nation's women from crime and other forms of violence, especially domestic violence. Madam Speaker, a quick search on the internet revealed that there were at least 39 newspaper articles relating to domestic violence alone in 2018. Many citizens and several commentators have expressed the view that this government has neglected our women and girls and have failed to protect them. A frequent claim by victims of violence and stakeholders is that the protection of our women and girls is low down on this government's list of priorities. There is an urgent need for action to be taken to provide the greatest protection to our women and girls. We cannot continue to allow our women and girls to endure the suffering, hardship, murder, and mayhem that they have experienced in the last few years. And it is for this reason that I have brought this motion today to force and to compel the government to take urgent action to protect and defend our women and to eliminate all forms of violence against our women. Madam Speaker, during this presentation, I intend to review some of the evidence that women are increasingly experiencing being subjected to all forms of violence, to remind us of why as a country we need to do more to address this issue, to examine some of the measures that are already in place and to point out some of the shortcomings of these current measures, and to provide some suggestions on the way forward, including examples from other jurisdictions. Madam Speaker, in preparation for this motion, I engaged several stakeholders who provided valuable information and suggestions. Before I proceed, I would want to take the opportunity to thank them, the many stakeholders who provided these suggestions, and these would have included representatives from CEDAW, from Momantra, from the UWI, Institute of Gender Development Studies, from the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, from the Mindwise Project, the UNC Women's Arm, and of course as well, the Equal Opportunities Commission. I also want to state for the records, Madam Speaker, that some of the views and ideas expressed here would have emanated from two events in the constituency of Faizabad, one last November to mark the commemoration of International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, when several of the participants would have expressed their views, and of recently this week, when again many women would have participated in an event to celebrate and to mark International Women's Day. And some of their opinions and suggestions are taken into this presentation, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a review of statistics from the Crime and Problem Analysis Branch of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service for the 14-year period, 2000 to 2013, showed that 329 women were killed as a result of domestic violence. This translates to an average of just over 23 women per year. Madam Speaker, this means that during this period, an average of close to 2 women were killed every month from domestic violence incidents, a very startling figure, Madam Speaker, especially so in the knowledge that this is an entirely preventable cause of death amongst women. So, Madam Speaker, are things any better today? Well, in 2017, and it hurts my heart to say this, perpetrators had a bumper year inflicting their atrocities on the nation's women, as 52 women were murdered, 19 of them as a result of domestic violence. Well, what happened in 2018? Madam Speaker, Rhonda Dowlett, writing in the Trinidad Guardian on Tuesday, January 1st, 2019, New Year's Day this year, noted that the year 2018 ended with 516 murders, making it the second deadliest year in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. She went on to note that 47 females and 13 children were killed in 2018. Of the female deaths, 24 of the 47 were related to domestic violence, and 3 of the children killed were domestic violence related. This prompted Marina Salandi Brown, writing in the Newsday on Sunday, 9 September 2018, to conclude that killing women is now a sport. Madam Speaker, allow me to quote from this article. Killing women is now a sport. Very unfortunate headline, but I'm afraid that there is some truth in it. And she says, the murder on Monday of Tehila Sinclair by her enraged former lover brought me up short, not only because of the horror of the act, but rather the words of the victim's 5-year-old child who witnessed the murderous act and had himself been attacked. And I quote, "If you see how he chopped up my mommy," he reportedly cried. The little boy had run to get help once the violence had started. The question, what will become of that young person who has been so traumatized and violated, immediately framed itself in my mind. He will need lifelong help to overcome it. But will he get it? And this is what is stated here, Madam Speaker. And I suspect that is the reason that we are debating this here today, to look at the measures that are going to be in place, not only to assist the victims of domestic violence directly, but also the children and those who witnessed it as well. So, Madam Speaker, I just want, so we have a perspective on this, and we are speaking about domestic violence, but it's happening in the perspective of other crimes that are taking place in the society. And again, if I just look at 2018, and I'll just run through the highlights. I don't want to go into details, but this is what's been happening in Trinidad and Tobago. Brutal murders, Palisco woman chopped to death by ex-boyfriend. Pregnant woman found murdered in Wallerfield. Mom of 6 found dead. U.S. citizen murdered, throat slit. Woman police constable, Raquel Renee Rachel Kipps, 27, was murdered. National awardee found dead after house fire. Body found by hunters may be missing. Mom, cops suspect. Woman found dead at Maraval home. Woman shot in Couva, succumbs to injuries at hospital. Woman stabbed to death in Port of Spain. Londonville pastor stabbed to death. Woman found dead in the bathroom of the attorney's office. Trini woman stalked, killed by ex-boyfriend in Florida. Massacre in La Brea. man, woman, children killed. You may recall that incident when 4 people were killed. Woman shot dead outside home, woman beaten to death in Gasparilla, female victim in Woodbrook robbery identified, killed for $7,000. Autopsy shows a Rima woman died from asphyxiation. Badly burnt remains confirmed to be that of missing woman. I just list the incidents, Madam Speaker, so that we put all of this in perspective. So, Madam Speaker, there is no doubt that violent crime against women resulting in death is increasing in our society, but the story does not end there. Those who escape death suffer physical and psychological injury. Madam Speaker, figures from the Crime and Problem Analysis branch of the TTPS for the same 14-year period, 2000 to 2013, revealed the following domestic violence statistics. Sexual abuse, 600. Wounding, 661. Assault by beating, 9,565. Malicious damage, 189. Threats, 5,351. Verbal abuse, 637. Emotional psychological abuse, 457. Financial abuse, 21. Child abuse and abandonment, 143. Breach of protection order, 1,074. And I'll come back to speak about this later in my presentation, Madam Speaker. Breach of protection order, 1,074. Offensive phone calls, 51. Madam Speaker, this represents a total of 19,078 breaches and offenses against women in that 14-year period. What is more frightening, Madam Speaker, is that surveys have revealed that there is a significant amount of underreporting by victims of threats and crimes committed against them. And these figures may have to be multiplied by a factor of 6.3, according to some studies, to determine the real extent of the problem in Trinidad and Tobago. So, Madam Speaker, why are women afraid to report these violations of their persons? Nalini Silal, in an article in the Newsday of 2nd March 2018, entitled Teacher Lived Life of Abuse. And I just want to quote from this article, Madam Speaker, regarding murder victim Margaret Guevara. This is following the investigation after her death. Officers were also informed by relatives of the victim that she opted not to report the acts of violence committed against her because she did not want to disrupt her children's lives. Relatives told investigators that they often observed strange black and blue marks, scratches, and other injuries from Guevara, and when inquired, she made excuses claiming that she had fallen or suffered the injuries while doing housework. A very common finding in our society, Madam Speaker. We know now, Madam Speaker, that from a report in yesterday's Express newspaper, that this male relative, and we continue to hear about male relative being reported in the newspaper, was in fact her husband, who is now charged 1 year later for her murder, a 46-year-old beekeeper of coal mine Sandy Grande. So, allow me, Madam Speaker, to draw the attention of the House to the National Women's Health Survey, very useful, important document with important information, which I'll be referring to throughout my presentation. And the findings of this survey suggest that 1 in 3 women remained quiet about their experience, and most survivors did not seek or receive assistance for their situation. This is worrisome, because it means that there is something happening which prevents or makes victims and potential victims afraid to access services that may be in place. Several factors precluded women from accessing help: fear, shame, the normalcy associated with violence. And I just want to speak a little bit more about this, Madam Speaker. Normalcy associated with violence. And if I were to suggest that the cultural norms that serve to justify male domination within the family and within, will facilitate the tolerance of domestic violence and the indifference of the authorities. And again, we have to look at that in terms of how the courts, how the police treat with victims of domestic violence. There's a lot that needs to be done in that area, Madam Speaker. The reason why survivors were reluctant to leave violent partners included, and I often wonder about this, Madam Speaker, why is it that women remain in violent relationships, knowing that statistically they stand a very good chance of not coming out alive of those relationships? The reasons included, and I'm quoting again, Member for Tobago East, I'm sure you're very familiar with the findings of this woman health survey. The reasons were given as to why they were reluctant to leave violent partners included economic survival, and this is something for us because it means that we have to take steps to ensure the economic independence of women going forward in our society. A concern for their children, that was the case with Margaret Rivera, and a desire to keep the family structure intact. So all very noble causes, Madam Speaker, but unfortunately reasons that have led to the death of so many women in Trinidad and Tobago. Women of all ages and in all places continue to be at risk, Madam Speaker. Angela Mackenzie, 63, was hacked to death in her garden in Siparia earlier this year, trying to do some gardening, plant some crops perhaps. Maria Neptune, 18, killed outside the home in Macoya. Sharice Bramble killed in a home invasion, and so on. So, you know, Madam Speaker, there's a video, and I try to make it a little bit light because this is very serious and gruesome statistics that we are dealing with here. I just want to make it light. There's a video says women gone wild, and I am wondering whether in Trinidad and Tobago that video now is men gone wild. It makes me wonder really and truly what is happening in our society, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago remains a dangerous place, not only for locals, but for visitors. Sadly, we all remember the case of the Japanese pan player and carnival tourist Asami Nagakia, who was found dead in the Queen's Park Savannah on Ash Wednesday in 2016, and as recently as 2 weeks ago when 2 female English tourists were assaulted in Tobago. So women remain at risk throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, allow me to just address briefly the issue of human trafficking, which was also part of the motion. And I quote here from the Director of the Counter-Trafficking Unit at the Ministry of National Security, Ayanna Wheeler, who was speaking at a Maraval Rotary Club meeting in February 2019, stated that an average of 10 to 15 cases of human trafficking are identified annually in Trinidad and Tobago. In 2019, she noted that there were 10 confirmed cases so far of mixed nature, forced labor, and sexual exploitation, especially amongst women. This is of increasing concern because of the issue that is happening with the refugees coming across from Venezuela and other Latin American countries. But there's more to it, Madam Speaker. In a bulletin from the bulletin 24076, emanating out of Bogota in Colombia, October 3rd, 2018, states that a criminal organization in a particular region in Colombia recruited young people between the ages of 15 and 19 years and promised them lucrative work in, guess where, Madam Speaker? Trinidad and Tobago. And they're in the process of trying to validate about 100 cases. And of course, recently, last month, we would have had the case of 19 South American female victims between the ages of 15 to 19 years being rescued by the police in various areas in North Trinidad. So human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago remains a clear and present danger. Ria Sukdeo and Carolyn Kitwaru and others disappeared under mysterious circumstances and are yet to be found. And this has fueled speculation, Madam Speaker, that they may have been victims of human trafficking. The U.S. Department of State report on human trafficking 2018 makes the observation that the government of Trinidad and Tobago does not fully meet the minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking. This is something that will raise a red flag, and of course it suggests that we have a lot more to do as a nation, and of course the government will have a lot more to do. And there raised some concerns about delays in prosecution, the decrease in the amount of funding for victim services, and the fact that we did not have policies in place regulating, policies and laws regulating foreign labor recruiters. So Madam Speaker, I just want to return to the bruising issue of domestic violence. And again, if you will allow me, this is communication that was sent to me following a request from the Crime and Problem Analysis branch of the TTPS. And I asked for the figures over the last 10 years, 2008 to 2018, in terms of domestic violence and what has been happening. And Madam Speaker, the results that I received are as follows. In 2008, when we're speaking directly now to murders attributable to domestic violence, and the figures that were given is 2008, 19, 2009, 11, 2010, 18, 2011, 8, 2012, 10, 2013, 12, 2014, 15, 2015, 10, 2016, 19, 2017, 19, 2018, 24. Again, very, very startling figures, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, there are several reasons why we, all of us here as parliamentarians, must be concerned, and why we on this side, as members of the opposition, and on behalf of the women of this country, should be asking the government, as the custodian of the country's resources, to do more and to take urgent steps to ensure the protection of our nation's women from increasing crime and domestic violence. Why should we be addressing this issue? Well, of course, first of all, Madam Speaker, we have a moral obligation as a civilized nation to protect our nation's women. Women play a fundamental and critical role in the economic and social development of any society, and it is in our interest as a nation that we protect their health so that they may fulfill their reproductive role. Yes, Member for St. Joseph, I'm sure you would appreciate that this is a public health issue as well. Their reproductive role, and this is very close to my heart, Madam Speaker, because as a professional, I deal with women, I've been dealing with women in a professional capacity for more than 30 years, and I see the pain sometimes. Sometimes they come into the office with you know, the bruises and the black spots that cannot be easily explained, and they come up with excuses, but you know, with my experience, I know what is happening, and then I see the results of it 5 years down the road when the relationship was separated for those very reasons. And I also see the pain that women experience in giving birth to children and ensuring that the generations continue. So that is a very important role that they have, the reproductive role. And of course, they have the productive role, Member for Tobago East, as very productive members of society. And women are increasingly taking up that challenge. And we need to address their productive role in terms of the non-paid social work, which I'm sure that we're all aware of. And their community development role. And in passing, Madam Speaker, with regards to their community development role and solutions that may be available, I just want to bring to the attention of the House the WINAD study, which is a study that was done in East Port of Spain that has many recommendations, which I hope the government will be inclined to look at and to implement. So we've had two very good reasons why we should be looking at this, but more than that, Madam Speaker, is that our Constitution guards the human rights of all persons within the country and holds the state accountable for violation of human rights. So we are legally bound by our Constitution to protect the rights of women. And this is so because we know that gender-based violence threatens women's right to life and security of the person, and the obligation mandated by this provision in the Constitution is to protect the human rights of persons, and it places a positive obligation on the state to protect women and girls from domestic and sexual violence. And of course, the reason why we are here today is because we have a duty to comply with international human rights conventions, such as CEDAW 1979, the Inter-American Convention on the Prevention, Punishment, and Eradication of Violence Against Women, 1994, and the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, 1995, amongst others. And most importantly, our agreement to pursue SDG 5 and other UN development goals going forward to 2030. So, Madam Speaker, there are very, very good reasons why we should be paying attention, trying to address this matter, and to address it urgently. How do we define domestic violence, intimate partner violence? I just want to mention the intimate partner violence. There's the UN definitions, which I don't need to go into, but I just want to indicate that the term intimate partner violence is often used synonymously with domestic abuse or domestic violence, so that when we're speaking the same language. And to note that now domestic violence, the definition, is commonly defined to include all acts of physical, sexual, psychological, or economic violence. Very, very important part of that definition. So, Madam Speaker, I did mention the Women's Health Survey, which IDB funded. It was a national quantitative cross-sectional study which was designed to provide a diagnosis of violence against women and girls in Trinidad and Tobago, with a specific emphasis on intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual violence. And Madam Speaker, I trust that the member for Tobago East, the Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister, with responsibility for gender affairs, has taken careful note of the recommendations and is preparing to engage all stakeholders to solve this problem. And Madam Speaker, I say this because at the launch of this survey, and I refer to an article here written by Carol Matru, Domestic Violence Victims Feel Trapped, where the minister is reported and quoted to have said that behavior change did not have the luxury of time, and I agree with her. And it was not something that government could do on its own. Now, this is what the minister said at this launch, that the government could not do this on its own. And we on the side here are very willing and able to assist in whatever is necessary, and of course, all the NGOs and so on, and all of the stakeholders in Trinidad and Tobago. So I suspect this is what the minister is alluding to, but I'm sure that we will hear what her intentions were when she made that statement. So, Madam Speaker, as I said, the report is there. It speaks to, is a sample of just over 1,000 women, 1,079 women. I would not have the time to go into all of the findings, nor the recommendations, but just to note that 30% of women experience lifetime physical and/or sexual partner violence. 68% of women with very controlling partners, and again, that's an issue, one of the factors, experience emotional partner violence over the lifetime. And sometimes we tend to overlook the abuses and the emotional abuse, but eventually that may lead to physical abuse as well. And interestingly, 7% of women experience physical violence during pregnancy. Physical violence during pregnancy, when the woman is trying to fulfill her role, in terms of propagation of society, Madam Speaker. How can we allow that? How can that happen? And 90% of these incidents is not by strangers, Madam Speaker. It involves the father of the unborn child. A very, very frightening statistic, and something that we as a people, we as a nation, as a country, need to take note of and to take urgent steps to address. What is also worrying in this study, Madam Speaker, is that 1/3 of intimate partner survivors felt that violence between a husband and a wife is a private matter. And we still have that issue, we have that cultural issue, and this could be one of the hindrances, Madam Speaker, that is preventing us going forward in terms of addressing and reporting this matter properly. If we were to put this another way, in the 15 to 64 age bracket, over 100,000 women in Trinidad and Tobago are estimated to have experienced one or more acts of physical and/or sexual violence perpetrated by male partners. So we're talking about partner violence here, Madam Speaker. What is even more worrying statistic is that approximately 11,000 are likely to still be in abusive relationships. Very, very, very worrying, Madam Speaker. The study also identified the associated factors that might preclude women to be victims of domestic abuse. And some of the factors were lower education attainment, so that is something that we can address. It was found to be more common in rural women rather than urban women. Again, that may be a cultural issue. age between 20 and 34 years, married or living with a partner at a young age. What about the perpetrators, the men who perpetrate this domestic violence? Well, again, lower levels of education, so an avenue for intervention. Unemployed, big issue, and of course in difficult economic times, an even more important issue. Men who are engaged in some form of substance abuse, an issue that we can address, and again in the age group 25 to 34. What were the common triggers identified by women for their partner's violent behavior? What would cause men to come home and start to beat up on their partners? Well, being drunk was identified as one factor. Being jealous, apparently, is a major issue in this country. Sorry? Well, well, both, of course, yeah, it doesn't exclude the other. And him wanting to show her who is the boss was identified as a factor, Madam Speaker. You know, it's difficult to understand, you know, how that can be an issue in Trinidad and Tobago in 2019. But be that as it may, Madam Speaker. So what is the impact of domestic violence, Madam Speaker? And I refer to an IDB technical report of 2016 by Randy C. Prasad. And of course, we know the most serious impact would be death, and we spoke about those figures already. Violence, and interestingly, of 10,000 cases reported between 2007 to 2012, 72.3% were female. Of course, we know that that is the majority, that females are more subject to domestic abuse. We seem to have similar numbers in the African and East Indian population, so that doesn't make a difference. The other issues, the other effects, the other impact is the psychological distress and the trauma. Quite often you can have women suffering from anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. They are more prone to higher consumption levels of alcohol, tobacco, and illegal drugs. They are more likely to experience depression and attempt suicide. And of course, there are the health complications, sexually transmitted infections, unwanted pregnancy, miscarriage, and so on. And Madam Speaker, it also creates a big effect on society. It creates fear amongst those who are close to it, those who experience it, neighbors sometimes in the village or, you know, in an apartment building, and a sense of helplessness amongst those who are unsure as to what needs to be done to reduce its incidence. So, Madam Speaker, I have defined the problem. Allow me just to have a look at now at the measures that are in place to deal with domestic violence. And I just wanted to categorize those really into three categories. One would be the legislative measures, the other would be the administrative and policy measures. And I also want to speak a little bit about preventative measures, measures that we can implement to prevent this problem in the first place. The basis of the legislation that addresses gender-based violence, of course, is the Domestic Violence Act of 1999, an act which seems to be a very progressive piece of legislation, but which has been found to be wanting in several areas. There are quite a few provisions here that can protect women, but the question is, Madam Speaker, why are we still having the number of cases of domestic abuse and women getting killed despite the legislation? And I think it is in this regard that many have looked at the shortcomings, the shortfalls in this act, especially the Equal Opportunity Commission. And I wrote the chairman of the Equal Opportunity Commission seeking a response because I became aware during my research that they had proposed some amendments to the Domestic Violence Act. And in her response, the chairman, Lynette Sibaran-Sweet, indicated to me that I should look at their media statement. And so I just want to draw reference to the media statement of the EOC, and this is dated 17 March 2018. And it speaks about the Domestic Violence Act being a progressive piece of legislation. But it says, as such, in November 2017, the EOC proposed 10 legislative and policy amendments to the Act at a public forum jointly hosted with the UWI Institute for Gender Development Studies, commemorating the 16 days of activism on ending gender-based violence. This is an event that normally takes place internationally, locally and internationally, around November, December. You'll be very much aware of that, Madam Speaker. These proposed amendments can be used to strengthen the accountability of the state and state actors to perform with due diligence to protect and prevent against gender-based domestic violence. And they would have justified, there's a policy document from the EOC, a position paper, that justifies the reasoning behind the amendments. I don't need to go into detail of that. I'm sure my colleagues who are speaking after me with more legal background will address that. But just to mention in passing, Madam Speaker, but some of the recommendations they have made would be to remove the perpetrator from the home, not the victim. The police must respond to all complaints that apparently is in the law but is not being followed. To amend the definition of cohabitant to include same-sex relationships, taking account of our changing social situations in the country. Police must charge for assaults again in the law but not being followed, and for breaches of protection orders. No bail for persons charged with breaches of the protection orders. Provide a network of support to persons who have a protection order. Create intervention for perpetrators threatening to kill, which they're suggesting as a new section. The issue of dealing with perpetrators, both from a legal perspective and from a social perspective, still needs some work to be done. We tend to focus on the victims, but not so much on the perpetrators of these crimes. And they go on to talk about interagency protocols between police magistrates, prosecutors, and social workers and shelters, and to create mandatory programs for victims and perpetrators, and to resuscitate the police domestic violence register. And this media release, Madam Speaker, and I quote here directly now from this media release, we call on the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs to expedite these proposed amendments as a matter of urgency to better respond and prosecute domestic violence as a criminal act, as we believe that the amendments will effect real change and prevent future domestic deaths. So we await the response of the government with regards to this request from the Equal Opportunities Commission, Madam Speaker. And just to indicate that this proposed amendments have gotten support from various quarters. And I quote here from the from the Guardian of 26 June 2018, article written by Shaliza Hassan Ali. Police Association welcomes changes to protection orders. And I just want to quote from this article, Madam Speaker, because there is an intervention here which could be regarded as controversial, and it comes from the president of the Police Service Welfare Association, Inspector Michael Seals, and speaking about gaps in the Act, and he's in support of some of the proposals, saying that the police service needed more power, and recommended not harsher penalties and decisive action that protects the victim. So he is calling for the swift implementation of the electronic bracelets on people served with protection orders. So this is a suggestion here coming from the president of the Police Service Welfare Association. Madam Speaker. So one of the issues before I leave the Domestic Violence Act, Madam Speaker, is the issue of the breach of the protection order. And you know, I often wonder, I mean, it's a protection order, it's meant to protect the woman from violence, from being killed. But in many, many instances, Madam Speaker, we have a situation where, in spite of a protection order, women get violated and they get killed. What is the reason? And let us listen to this story, Madam Speaker. And again, I quote here a story by Charlene C. Prasad, and the headline is "A Man Beating Me in the Night." You know, and this speaks to the experience of a single mother, Ramraji Chance, who is appealing to the police to step up their efforts to arrest a man she alleges continuously breaches a protection order and beats her in front of her young children every night. This makes a joke of the protection order, Madam Speaker. She goes on to say that within hours, the man breached the order, beating Chance in front of the children before stripping himself naked and threatening to kill the children. He was arrested later that night and spent the weekend in police custody, but released on bail on Monday. And he comes back to taunt and to haunt this family. You know, and Madam Speaker, she's quoted as saying, it is too much for me. I just want a little bit of peace with my children, and no matter what he says, when he reaches in front of the magistrate, he coming right back here to beat me when court finish. So this is a woman talking about her own experience who, in terms of how the protection order has failed to protect her, Madam Speaker. So again, you know, a lot of food there for thought and something that we would need to pay attention to. What about the proposals? Total? Okay. All right, so. Okay, so Madam Speaker, what about proposals from other stakeholders? There's proposals from the head of the Institute of Gender Development Studies, who has raised concern about no approved national strategic plan to end gender-based violence, a plan which apparently has been sitting in front of Cabinet for a while. And she also raised the concern of no nationwide primary school level program. I just wanted, it would be remiss of me, Madam Speaker, if I did not bring to this debate these suggestions that from the consultation with the various stakeholders, and they raise issues of insufficient training for police, poor privacy at police stations, poor privacy at health facilities, data not readily available at police stations, and insufficient protection and support for victims. I wanted to say a bit on the policy administrative measures, Madam Speaker, but in the interest of time, I will leave that to the colleagues. I just wanted to mention briefly the way forward, and to mention in other jurisdictions, for example, in the United Kingdom, the budget allocation for treating with domestic violence is ring-fenced, so it cannot be touched by other ministries, a very good measure. They also have created a victims charter for the rights of victims, what victims would expect. In the Dominican Republic, they have special prosecutor officers that work exclusively with domestic violence cases. And they also have something called the Amigos de la Mujer. And of course, in Trinidad and Tobago, now we all know Spanish because of our circumstances. And it means, and it means,
one way or the other.
No, I meant the Spanish language, Madam Speaker, just for clarity. And of course, it means friend of the woman. And this really is a name for designated police squads that go out specially to investigate these incidents. And of course, they have dedicated magistrates' court and criminal courts that deal specifically with domestic violence. And they have a care center for abused women. So, Madam Speaker, with regards to prevention, we spoke about the importance of increasing women's economic empowerment, and I'm sure my colleagues will address that going forward. But I feel very strongly, Madam Speaker, that one of the most significant prevention efforts should be geared towards education of our young men and women, boys and girls, in the primary schools. Madam Speaker, I think that is where it has to start, in the primary schools. And I am sure, that the member for Tobago East would have had discussions with her colleagues in the Ministry of Education, and I trust that she will tell us about that. But I think that is an important intervention. I think it's overdue, it's necessary, and it's something that we need like yesterday. And of course, the other issue would be the issue of better mental health screening, because we quite often hear of normal-looking men just go home and, they pull out a gun and they shoot somebody. They couldn't have been normal. There must have been something going on in their minds, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, the solution to this problem must begin with leadership that respects and cherishes our women and girls. Without this, we are simply spinning top in mud. We must see the success of our women as the success of our society as a whole. And our men must not be threatened or intimidated by our women taking their rightful place in society. We must instill in our men and boys respect for our women. They must understand that our women are our equals, and gone are the days when they are seen to be members of a lesser class. So, Madam Speaker, I am proud to be a member of a political party that not only talks the talk, but stand up for women and protect them at all costs. Yeah. Madam Speaker, I thank you for the opportunity, and I beg to move.
The motion piloted by my colleague, the member for Faizabad, to second it and reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Honourable members, the motion being seconded I shall now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that the government take urgent steps to ensure the protection of our nation's women. Member for Tobago East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to respond to this motion. It's not very often I get to commend those on the other side, but I would like to thank the member for Faisal for helping us in highlighting the issue of domestic violence and violence against women. Just to put your heart at ease in some of the issues you have raised, in terms of the Domestic Violence Act, just around the 31st of January of this year, I would have had the opportunity to review the preliminary draft working document, and a number of the recommendations proposed by stakeholders would have been considered. Like yourself, we at the Office of the Prime Minister, Gender and Child Affairs, we engage stakeholders continuously. We meet with them frequently to learn from them what approaches we could integrate into our strategies, as well as international best practices as well. So just to rest your heart on the matters in terms of the Domestic Violence Act, it is being worked on, and I had the opportunity to look at a preliminary draft on the 31st of January of this year. Okay? In terms of the statistics coming forward, I don't want to dispute your statistics, because I know for a fact the numbers are real. But one of the things I would like to point out is the fact that we now have this central registry on domestic violence, which means that we pull data from all over, which before wasn't being coordinated. Now we have that coming to our central registry. This gives us the opportunity as government to take an all-of-government approach to addressing the issue, not only for victims, but for perpetrators as well, ensuring that we put policies and programs in place to protect those who would have been victims and who are survivors, and to help those who are perpetrators move away from the habit and also to change their lifestyle. Okay, having said that, I want to just cast our minds back to last year, Carnival. Madam Speaker, in 2017, during the Child Abuse Awareness and Prevention Month, the Office of the Prime Minister would have partnered with Be Mobile to send out messages to their clientele. The messages would have been crafted to ensure that persons would have been aware of the different services available in terms of child abuse, the contact numbers that we could have reached out to get assistance. When we recognized that the response from the public was so positive, we would have decided to move it out from just child abuse awareness and prevention, and also extend it to issues around HIV, gender-based violence, domestic violence. So leading up to Carnival 2018, we would have again partnered with Be Mobile to send out messages. And I remember the day the program was launched, Madam Speaker. I didn't even realize that we had actually started it until I started getting messages on my phone commending me and commending the government. And I was really elated, and I saw messages coming in on social media platform about, it was a good move. And then around midday, things started going downhill. And it was the fact that an opposition senator decided to politicize the whole issue and would have put out a message saying, why is the government bothering me about this issue? Who gave them permission to use my cell number to send messages about domestic violence, etc.? And that would have started a chain effect where people then started to jump on the bandwagon and complaining. But Madam Speaker, we were forced to work with Be Mobile to send out a message to the public to alert them that this is a voluntary service. If you wish to opt out, you can opt out. But Madam Speaker, at the end of the Carnival period, we were able to meet over 250-something thousand citizens with information about domestic violence, about HIV, about child abuse. We would have sensitized the public about what you can do if you see something happening, what you can do if you're a victim, what numbers to contact, Madam Speaker, and that would have been a very successful strategy, because even though there was an attempt to politicize the issue, persons would have still reached out to the Office of the Prime Minister, because I started panicking and saying, you know what, should we pull this initiative? Should we pull it? And after Be Mobile said, no, don't pull the initiative. What we would have done was at the bottom of the message, instead of just saying OPM, we include the OPM, Gender and Child Affairs, knowing that it was coming from the specific aspect of Office of the Prime Minister treating with the issue of domestic violence and gender-based violence, etc. And B-Mobile would have indicated to us that after we sent out the message asking persons to voluntarily ask them to opt them out, they didn't get any calls coming in saying we don't want a message. So people were actually grateful to know, okay, yes, there are services available. Yes, there are resources available. Thank you for making us aware. We can now know if it's a domestic violence situation, call 800-SAVE. If it's child abuse, call 800-2014. People were really grateful for the information. And that was just a small part of a wider strategy, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, our strategy would have also included work in terms of the legislative framework in Trinidad and Tobago. And I would have mentioned before the Domestic Violence Act. But we have seen recently, right in this Honourable House, where a number of bills were passed to protect not only our women, but our women and our children. And we have significantly strengthened the framework for our children in Trinidad and Tobago, creating opportunities for them to live a more meaningful life. And, Madam Speaker, we are seeing the effects of this out in the public domain, where even though people say the numbers are going up, I often argue the numbers are going up because of the awareness created. When people say that, before it was less, now because people know that we have the services available, they know who to contact, more people are reaching out. Before they weren't empowered to reach out, but now they actually are empowered because of the work we are doing, not only with government and government agencies, but with all of the different sectors in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to just highlight some of the programs and initiatives that would have been coming out of the Office of the Prime Minister within the last few years. Madam Speaker, we have significantly strengthened resources at the National Domestic Violence Hotline 800-SAVE. There was a time when we did not have enough active listeners. So when people call in, we had to create a shift system. Now we have this service up and running 24/7, so if somebody reach out to the hotline, there's always somebody at the end of the line to give them words of comfort, provide them information in terms of where to go if they need to find a shelter. Madam Speaker, as I'm speaking about shelters, one of the things that we have done as government was try to establish domestic violence shelters to facilitate our women with children. And this is a call I want to make to the public. We have sent out documents to tender more than once, begging stakeholders to come on board and partner with us, because we recognize that we can't do it alone. Government cannot solve this problem alone. And, Madam Speaker, we have the buildings up and waiting, and we are just waiting for voluntary organizations to respond positive to manage the facilities, because what the facilities would do, the Honourable Member for Faisabad mentioned it, women worrying about their children, especially women with boys over the age of 14. Some of the private shelters won't take them if they will come with a boy child who is 14 years old. We have the facility where we will be able to take that woman out of a situation with her children and give them temporary respite, help her to get back on her feet, Madam Speaker, and be economically empowered. But we need the support of the NGO sector to help us to manage it. I will say it again, government cannot do it alone. If we are to really address the issue of gender-based violence in Trinidad and Tobago, it calls for all hands on deck. PNM and UNC working together, every political party working together, every stakeholder, every religious organization, every organization working with women, every organization working with men. It cannot be just up to this government. We have to do it together. But again, in terms of the shelters, I'm begging those agencies, if you have the capacity to manage it, come forward. We are willing to work with you. We already developed the template for management. We have already developed a template in terms of staffing. What kind of training you need? We just need people to be brave enough to step forward and say, yes, we will work with you to help manage these facilities we have already constructed and waiting to service the women and men of Trinidad and Tobago, because we did not leave the men undone, Madam Speaker. When we were building and establishing those facilities, we took into consideration that men are indeed victims of domestic violence as well. Madam Speaker, in terms of our approach to solving the issue, one of the things I always point was that if men are part of the problem, they have to be a part of the solution. So we have been engaging men and boys in communities in different forums to help them to understand that, listen, if we have to end gender-based violence, you have to recognize that you are part of the solution because you are part of the problem. So we would have launched our Defining Masculine Excellence program, or barbershop initiative, which would have been reaching out to not only adults, but males as well. And I'll go into further details, but just outline some of the things that we have been doing. And also, the Defense Force would have been instrumental in coming on board and working part of the training in that as well. Even private sector would have reached out to the Office of the Prime Minister, asking for the barbershop initiative to be introduced in some of their different sectors. For example, Massey would have approached us about the whole barbershop initiative, coming to their staff and helping their staff to really be a part of the call to work together with government to end violence against women and girls. Madam Speaker, I just mentioned the barbershop initiative, and I just want to go into some more details for you to understand the context of it. Right, the local theme we use in terms of the barbershop initiative is celebrating the health and well-being of men and boys, and the seminars often include interactive sessions as well as male developmental workshop. I remember last year, we would have had a situation where a young lady was murdered, and we would have gone into the community over a series of weeks, and we'd have worked with different NGOs in the community, and also used the whole strategy of the barbershop initiative to bring about change. And what we do is that when we leave the community with what we call community champions. We train men who will stay in the community and then be able to be influencers and carry the message forward. Even as we move out, we know we left somebody or persons in the community so empowered and with the skills to be able to carry the message forward to ensure that it stays there and we maintain the change and the progress we would have made. So in terms of the barbershop initiative, we would have gone to communities as Sobo Village, Los Bajos, Five Rivers, and Malabar. We would have gone to the Gasparillo Secondary School, the Malabar Secondary School, and Five Rivers Secondary School, and also the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service would have benefited from this initiative. Madam Speaker, another initiative coming out of the Office of the Prime Minister to treat with the whole issue of violence against women and girls is that we, in collaboration with UN Women, we conducted a 5-day training program, a facilitator training program under the UN Women Foundation program, which was done on the 20th and the 24th of August in 2018. And Madam Speaker, most of these initiatives come out from the fact that when we meet with the NGO sector, they will make proposals to us as to what can we do to address the situation. And we often take their ideas, work with them, and if we cannot find the resources internally, we reach out to our international partners to be able to fund, if it's not in cash, but in kind. And that's one of the strategies we use. So with the UN Women Foundation program, which was held in August, we would have targeted males and females between the ages of 13 to 24 years. The program was designed to engender an appreciation of core gender concepts, such as gender socialization, gender equality, and human rights among this age group in Trinidad and Tobago. The overarching goal of the Foundation's program is to accelerate action towards preventing gender-based violence. Also, we had 27 persons trained from various government agencies, ministries, and faith-based organizations. In terms of our gender-based violence sensitization initiatives, we would have had half-day sensitization workshops on gender-based violence for the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force on the 13th of November 2017. And also we would have the same workshops in San Fernando, in Tunapuna, and in Tobago as well. And what we would have done in terms of treating with gender-based violence, we'd also linked it. You want in Siparia? Sure, I'll facilitate Siparia. What we'd have done, we'd have also linked HIV with gender-based violence and started to, develop a comprehensive program. So when we go into the communities, we don't just treat with one issue, but other issues affecting our very vulnerable citizens. The Gender Affairs Division, in collaboration with the Academy of Nursing and the Allied Health of the University of the West Indies School of Nursing, hosted a 1-day sensitization workshop on gender, violence, and health on the Thursday, the 13th of November, 2017. Madam Speaker, in terms of our outreach and work with young people around gender-based violence, we would have hosted youth outreach programs, and we continue to do this at the different community-based organizations as well as our schools. Madam Speaker, a key aspect of addressing gender-based violence is, as the honourable member would have said for FISA, would have said, is our policy framework and developing a national strategy and action plan. And you noted that it is in cabinet, but although it is in cabinet, we have already started rolling out a number of the initiatives identified by our stakeholders that is enlisted in the strategic action plan to end gender-based violence, because cabinet would have given us to go ahead to implement certain aspects of it. And what we did, we met with the stakeholders and decided, okay, what are the key areas that we should roll out now to help to address the situation? And the one recurring theme is the fact that we have to have our men and our boys involved. So when we had the He for She program adopted by UN, and it was brought to Trinidad and Tobago by one of our NGOs, what we did, we embraced it at the Office of the Prime Minister. And I was really happy when, in the first year of it being rolled out, the Defence Force would have embraced the He for She program. And we saw where our men, servicemen and servicewomen were given a commitment to say, yes, I, as a man, I stand in solidarity with women. I will give a commitment to do my part to end gender-based violence. And we saw women as well taking up and said, yes, I stand with other women to work towards ending gender-based violence in Trinidad and Tobago. So the work is ongoing. What I must say, if we have a fault, is that we work hard, we work quiet, we don't boast enough of what we have been doing to really improve lives in Trinidad and Tobago. In terms of ensuring that the whole issue of gender is mainstreamed in our different ministries and departments, we have been training our gender focal points at different agencies, state agencies and ministries. To date, we have 76 gender focal points trained. So what they're supposed to do, they're supposed to become like the champions in the different agencies. You know, when we talk about change, and rolling out a change management strategy, it's often recommended that you have champions, to help to carry the message and to sustain it. So that is why we have been focusing on training and ensuring we have those focal points at the different ministries, agencies, and departments of the state. And in the long run, what we would like to do is to partner with private sector to have gender focal points in our private sector organizations as well. In terms of the CDAW and the CDAW report and all of that, the CDAW committee would have we have had a preliminary report. We have worked with the same committee we have mentioned, the CDAW committee, Trinidad and Tobago. They would have made proposals to us in terms of the areas that would have been identified at the last report that we need to strengthen. And we have been working with them to really work on those areas to ensure that when it comes to us to do our next periodic report, that we would not be flagged in those areas as weaknesses again. So we would have been partnering with those same agencies you would have called out, right? I want to talk about what we are doing in terms of the boys. As part of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, we have been training what we call child rights ambassadors, and not just empowering them in knowledge about their rights and their responsibilities as children, but also how they could help to change the culture in Trinidad and Tobago as it pertains to violence against women and girls, and as well as boys and men. So what we would have done in our Child Rights Ambassadors program, we would have trained not only girls in schools, but boys as well. We would have trained schools deep south, Tobago. It would have been extensive. And every year we increase the cadre of trainees coming forward under that program. What they now have is the ability to go out into their schools and their communities and carry the message forward. And you keep hearing me talking about carrying the message forward and change champions, because the communication has to be ongoing. We cannot do something today and have a success and stop. It must be sustained. And for it to be sustained, it really requires for us to have all hands on deck, as I said before. We cannot do it alone. I commend you for bringing emotion, but you have to work with us. So when we put strategies in place, for example, that text messaging strategy, that was very, very significant. And to have somebody come in on your side, come and really cry it down for political reasons. I wouldn't say what it is, but you'll figure it out soon. Hear somebody cry it down for political reasons. That was really disheartening because that initiative was actually making an impact. And we would have not moved it to gender and HIV and that sort of thing, because unless we didn't see the benefit of it when we had the Child Abuse Prevention Awareness Month and saw how it would have impacted on children. I remember I went to a village in my constituency and I was talking to some young girls and young boys, and I asked one of them, I said, so you know what's the number to call for Children's Authority? And the child rattled it off. I said, well, how you know the number? He said, my mommy got a message on her phone. And I laughed because I remember that was one of the messages that would have gone out when we were doing the campaign with Be Mobile. And it was so good to have private sector Trinidad and Tobago partner with us on this very important initiative, as well as continue the partnership to treat with the whole issue of gender-based violence, and then to have the initiative scorned and frowned upon by those on the other side who I was hoping would have been able to help us to really champion it forward. But today I want to thank, thank member for Faisal coming because he gave a personal commitment. He gave a personal commitment that those on the other side would work with the Office of the Prime Minister. He gave a commitment for his team. Mr. Faisal gave a commitment on behalf of his team that they're going to work with the Office of the Prime Minister to ensure that we reduce gender-based violence in Trinidad and Tobago. Oh, God. Madam Speaker, a national action plan to end gender-based violence includes strategies including strengthening state accountability and community action to end gender-based violence and sexual violence against women and girls, ensuring greater likelihood of perpetrators being punished, enhancing victim-survivor access to justice, minimizing the trauma of the prosecution process for victims of gender-based violence, improving the delivery of services to victims, and providing rehabilitation of perpetrators and strengthening data collection systems. Madam Speaker, as it pertains to perpetrators, we recognize that the only way we could help somebody to stop a habit is if we have the right interventions in place. And we have been committed to work with all our partners within the state to ensure that perpetrators have access to services, counseling, etc., Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, for our female victims of human trafficking, the honourable member would have mentioned talking to those at the counter-trafficking unit. We have been working with them as well. When we established the shelters for domestic violence victims, we also established a facility and we told them you have access to this facility. You can program it how you want to facilitate female victims of human trafficking. So there is a building that we have that they have access to, that they could be able to support those persons. So when you were talking, I was smiling because everything that you were saying, we have already started implementing, because just like you, we would have gone out, met with the stakeholders, engaged them, engaged different partners within the different ministries and departments to ensure that we really deliver on this promise. Because whenever I talk to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, I don't like to talk for likes and I don't like to talk for votes. When I talk, it's because I genuinely want to see something happen. Yes, I come from a background of community development, and I'm passionate about empowering people and really helping people to transform their lives. So for me, it's not about likes and about votes, but when I talk, it's giving a firm commitment. I will work with you and for you. This government will work with you and for you to address those social issues that cause our men and our women, our boys and our girls to resort to violence. As it pertains to the schools, we have been going to our schools and working with them on programs to prevent bullying, because bullying at the early childhood stage in primary school and even nursery school could trigger and signal something to come later on. And once we start working with our children from young, we could help to prevent abusive behavior going forward. Also, when children act out in schools, it sometimes signals that something is wrong in the home. And that way we are able to then go in and intervene in the home. In terms of the Children's Authority working to help to address this particular issue, somebody with a question time would have asked about the resources for the Children's Authority. We would have been systematically building out the authority, ensuring that we are reaching every corner of Trinidad and Tobago. Member for Naparima, you were quite grateful when we opened the facility down on your end. We opened one in Sangre Grande, and we're on the road towards opening one in Tobago as well. You know, and what we did recognize that we did not have all the resources in place. Cabinet so graciously would have approved funding just yesterday, so we could recruit the number of persons we need to enhance service delivery at Tobago, at Sangre Grande, and even at the facility I opened for my very good friend in Naparima. So we are working towards towards building out the systems to affect our children, so that when they grow up, they do not become perpetrators of violence. We are working to build out our system to help our women who are in situations of violence, so that they could emerge from it by providing training opportunities, so that when they leave the home and they're in a shelter, or when they leave the shelter, they could stand on their own 2 feet. They don't have to run back to that abusive situation, by providing traditional and non-traditional skills training for our women who would have been victims of domestic violence. We, as I said before, we are working with our perpetrators to help them to change their behavior. But again, I want to call on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We cannot do it alone. It needs all hands on deck. Again, I want to highlight the issue of our shelters. We really need the voluntary sector to come on board to help us to manage those shelters. I would have had the opportunity to visit a facility in Colombia, and what stood out for me was the fact that whereas government, the Colombian government would have established the infrastructure, put the building up, it was the NGOs who were programming it and ensuring that the women would have had access to training opportunities, counseling on site, medical intervention. It was the NGO sector that was doing it. So whereas government would have put the infrastructure, the plant in place, the NGO sector would have provided additional support in terms of operationalizing the facility. And that is what I took away as a strong point that we could implement here in Trinidad and Tobago. That is an approach that could work. I want to commend those, those people who work tirelessly in the background to really support women who would have been victims of violence. I want to highlight, the Miss Mars in Tobago, championing the cause of, women who would have been victims of domestic violence and working in her own little way to help to establish a shelter in Tobago. And I want to highlight all the different agencies right here in Trinidad who, when we cannot answer the call, they answer the call. Because as it is now, we don't have state shelters, but we have women accessing facilities because there are NGO sectors who are operating shelters. And I want to give the commitment of this government to ensure that the resources are in place. Even though times may be hard, one thing I could always say that the Honorable Minister of Finance, whenever we approach him to support our initiatives and to help us to fund it, he would try to find a way. May not be all, but we will get some. As we have always been able to deliver for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. If it is that we cannot find resources internally, I have been very fortunate to see where the international agencies would have supported the Office of the Prime Minister with our programs for our children, our programs for women, and that is going to continue. But even though we get the support from international agencies, even though the Minister of Finance may pump the resources in, it calls for a change in mindset. And a simple thing as our music and what we promote with our culture as well. I remember speaking right here at time and talking about my son. I don't have a radio at home because I don't have reception. And here my son coming and singing this song about, I live in the country, sorry you laugh, I live in the countryside in Tobago, so I don't get very good reception with the radio. I live in the countryside. But I remember my son coming home I remember my son coming home and singing Kiki in the background. I'm like, where he picked that up from? He's a little boy, now turned 7. And I was trying to figure out if he understood the context of kicking in the back door. And we really want our musician or artists to be more responsible in the types of message we put out into the public domain. That is a very, very, very critical point. We have to be mindful of the type of songs we promote because people listen and children internalize these messages, and then it goes from just a message into action. So,
Honourable Member for Tobago East, your original 30 minutes are now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to complete your presentation, if you wish.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, as I call for all hands on deck, I really want to encourage those of us in the entertainment industry to start promoting women more in a positive light. This year, the Office of the Prime Minister would have awarded a prize for a song that was geared towards, gender awareness, and also the NAC, the National AIDS Coordinating Committee, would have done the same, so that we could help, through our culture and our art, to promote a more positive image and to help to change the mindset and change the culture in Trinidad and Tobago. So, Madam Speaker, as I close again, I just want to again reiterate the fact that we need all hands on deck. It cannot be done. It cannot be done by the state alone. I call on my honourable members opposite to work with us, to support us as we continue to strengthen the framework to improve the service delivery in terms of domestic violence and to improve the lives of vulnerable women and girls in Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you.
Member for Couva North.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. First of all, Madam Speaker, let me commend my colleague, Member of Parliament for Faizabad, for bringing this very important motion. And let me also congratulate him for piloting the motion brilliantly here this afternoon. Madam Speaker, before I go into my contribution, I would just like to respond to the member for Tobago East. And I want to start off by making a comment on the last point that she made, which is, of course, talking about positive music that we need to encourage and positive lyrics from our local artists and otherwise. But I just want to remind her that her government has continued to support the employment of a local Calypsonian who was caught on video cursing and disrespecting our fellow citizens. So I want to know what kind of examples is this government continuing about, and you're saying one thing in the parliament, but outside you have persons and members of the government defending the negative actions and comments from our local artists. So that is food for thought, Madam Speaker, let me also continue by saying that I want to give the Minister some words of advice. And the Minister spoke earlier about working hard but quietly. And I want to give her some advice. In this business that we are all in, you need to communicate your work to the people and to the public. We are all elected members of Parliament, and therefore it is their monies that are paying for us to be here and to work on behalf of them. And therefore I want to urge the Minister to communicate effectively through the Ministry of Communication and otherwise to let the population know what is happening. Otherwise, no one will really believe until they are in a particular situation to respond. So, Madam Speaker, I just wanted to lay that there. Now, Madam Speaker, as I continue, let me also say that I have been really a strong advocate for women's rights in Trinidad and Tobago. And like my colleagues across the floor, we have all been fighting for equality, gender equality. As you know, we have global issues with respect to gender equality. But in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean region, we are, of course, dealing with issues of high incidences of violence against women. Madam Speaker, there's a quote that I want to share. There is no tool for development more effective than the empowerment of women, and that was said by Kofi Annan. Emily Taft Douglas said, if women understood and exercised their power, they could remake the world. And those are powerful words, Madam Speaker, that I want to encourage all women to live by. Now, Madam Speaker, World Health Organization report said approximately 35% of women in Latin America and the Caribbean region have experienced intimate partner violence and non-partner sexual violence in their lifetime. Preventing violence against women requires a multi-sectoral approach, and the health sector, while having a lead role to play in providing clinical and mental health services to women who experience violence, they themselves have to develop and upgrade that environment. Healthcare providers are trusted most by women to disclose abuse. Madam Speaker, in a study done, Violence Against Women in the Caribbean, by Janice Joseph of the Stockton University, Caribbean societies are organized around hierarchical gender power relations, with male domination reducing women to economic and emotional dependency. Madam, and in this study, the UN Women Caribbean report stated that 1 in 3 women in the Caribbean will experience domestic violence. Over 1/3 of the region's women report incidents of intimate or sexual violence. And according to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, every one of the Caribbean islands has a sexual violence rate that is higher than the world average. So, Madam Speaker, this is a serious issue that we need to tackle head on. There's been positive development in the laws governing gender-based violence. However, there are implementation challenges. So this study shows that the legislation, yes, it comes to Parliament. We hash it out on both sides. I am referring now to the Member of Parliament for Tobago East, who mentioned here that they have reviewed the Domestic Violence Act and that they would soon be coming with that. But that is not the problem, Madam Speaker. Well-laid legislation is not the problem. It is really the implementation of that legislation that is the challenge. And what they're suggesting is that the courts, police, and other law enforcement personnel often operate to dissuade people or women from executing their rights and achieving the protection afforded by the law. And I'm making reference to those women who are victims of domestic violence. Over 77% of the applications for protection orders are dismissed or withdrawn. And I want to draw reference to an article that was printed on June the 24th, 2018, that titled, "Protection Orders Are Worthless." And right here in TNT, they give the statistics that cases of domestic violence and child abuse are on the rise in TNT. And over the last 2 years, more than 57,000 applications for protection orders have been made. And it went on to say that according to the statistics by the International Women's Resource Network, in the past 2 years, more than 50 women who obtained protection or restraining orders against their husbands or partners are now dead. And Madam Speaker, that is a very serious issue that we need to look at, and I wonder if it is that hearing this and making recommendations that the government and the judiciary will probably agree in future to do away with these protection orders and put something in place that can really prevent and protect our women from domestic violence. Madam Speaker, in addition to that, I also want to state that systemic delays in the prosecution of offenses, there are delays that prolongs trauma and adversely affects the recollection of facts due to the passage of time, especially victims of domestic and sexual violence. So they're saying that the systemic delays in our justice system allows for victims of domestic violence and violent crime and sexual abuse to, of course, suffer further trauma when there are, of course, delays in the system. Victims are pressured to drop charges, inappropriate use of cash settlements that are now being utilized to prevent the prosecution of especially sex offenders.
Honorable members, the murmur is growing I'm being disturbed. I would like to hear the contribution from the member of Gouverneur. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, in the scrutiny of our system here in the Caribbean, Latin America and the Caribbean, they're saying that, of course, victims are pressured to drop charges, meaning those victims of rape and domestic violence. Inappropriate use of cash settlements are being utilized to prevent the prosecution of especially sex offenders, and this is the reality out there. Here in the Caribbean, we have a culture of reconciliation where many women feel guilty for sending their partners and fathers to their children to jail. Violence against women, it is ghettoized in legal reform, and of course it is that sort of stigma attached here in the Caribbean. Domestic violence has been pigeonholed as a family law matter in the Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore there is a failure to develop law and policies to address it as a criminal matter. And this is very, very important, Madam Speaker. Lack of specialized interventions, specialized responses are often necessary to victims of gender-based violence, but yet are noticeably lacking in the Caribbean. Too few police and prosecution departments have the specialized units that are dedicated to the investigation of domestic and sexual violence involving special victims. Even where such units have been established, they are often not sufficiently equipped to conduct the specialized interventions so critical to these offenses. So these are all, setbacks within the justice system that allows for our victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse to continue and to increase over the years, as we have seen by my colleague from Faizabad, as he mentioned the statistics. Patriarchal ideologies are prominent in the region and are difficult to change, Madam Speaker. And therefore, reform is needed. Substantial reform is needed to allow for protection and safety of our women. And some of these reforms are to improve the laws and policies, especially at the national level. I'm very heartened to hear again that the member of Parliament for Tobago East that the amended laws and improved laws with respect to the Domestic Violence Act will be coming soon to the Parliament, and we look forward to that. To ensure full implementation of laws and policies addressing violence against women. To guarantee a scaled-up funding and resources needed to fully implement the laws addressing violence against women at all levels on which they must operate. To monitor the compliance of law enforcement, justice, and health personnel with existing laws to protect women and girls when they are victims of violence. Care for victims, Madam Speaker, of violence against women. Care is extremely important. Guaranteeing appropriate medical and psychological care, legal assistance, and emergency housing alternatives for the victims. And I want to pause there for a minute because the emergency housing triggered a memory. We have the HDC here within the Ministry of Housing. And I remember a constituent, a single mother coming to me, and her boyfriend, when he came to visit his children, he would batter her, beat her badly. And most times, she would come to my office and I'd try to help her because it happened quite a few times. And then I remember, listening and I knew that there was this emergency housing system that was there for victims and other persons of, who experience such trauma. And I wrote a letter to the minister, the then Minister of Housing, and I stated in the letter quite clearly that this was an emergency housing situation in terms of the mom being a renter, the single mother being a renter, her boyfriend knowing where she's from and all of that. And she needed that support, that emergency housing support. Madam Speaker, a year went by and no response, no feedback. So right here in Trinidad and Tobago, we need to deal with these loopholes that exist. And I'm calling on the Minister of Gender and the Office of the Prime Minister to deal and look at this issue. This emergency housing situation that exists is not working. It's not working for the victims. Sorry? Yes, but the system, it has to go through the agency. It has to be processed. There's a process. That process was not engaged. It was just completely ignored a year after the fact. So we need, you know, the will needs to exist within the ministries, the government, the public officers to deal with victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. That's very, very important.
No? Members, it is now 4:30. This House now stands suspended. We shall resume at 5 p.m.